In the heart of Italy, where the sun spills golden light over rolling hills and vibrant valleys, lies a story of ambition, survival, and the birth of a city that would become legendary. The tale of Rome's founding is not just a historical account, it's a poignant narrative filled with passion, conflict, and the dreams of its early inhabitants. Long ago, before the rise of mighty emperors or sprawling empires, there was a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River. This humble beginning was the canvas upon which the Romans painted their destiny. According to myth, Rome's story begins with twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, born of a noble lineage yet raised in the wild. Their mother, Rhea Silvia, was a Vestal virgin, and their father, Mars, the god of war. From the very start, their lives were steeped in drama and destiny. Abandoned at birth and left to the mercy of the river, the twins were found by a she-wolf who nurtured and protected them. Can you imagine the fierce love and loyalty that must have blossomed between them as they faced the harsh realities of their world? They grew strong and courageous, embodying the spirit of survival. Together, they roamed the hills, hunting and playing, their laughter echoing against the ancient stones that would one day form the foundation of a mighty city. As they grew, so did their ambitions. They learned of their true heritage and the power that coursed through their veins. With dreams of establishing a city where people could find refuge and build new lives, Romulus and Remus set out to find a suitable location. The hills around the Tiber seemed perfect, filled with fertile land and natural resources. But dreams often collide with harsh realities. Tensions arose as the brothers argued over where to build their city, leading to a tragic confrontation. In a moment of fury, Romulus, driven by a mix of passion and the desire for greatness, killed his brother. The heartbreak of this betrayal resonates through time. The very act meant to establish a new beginning resulted in an irrevocable loss. Romulus went on to found the city of Rome, but he carried the weight of his brother's death on his shoulders. The pain of that moment, the echo of Remus's name, lingered in the air as the first walls of Rome were erected. Romulus would later become its first king, ruling with a mixture of strength and sorrow, forever haunted by the brother he lost. As the years passed, Romulus established the foundations of Roman society. He understood that a city needed more than walls, it needed people, families, and a sense of belonging. To attract settlers, he devised a plan that would set the course for Roman history. He invited those who were outcasts, the needy, and those seeking a fresh start. It was a bold move that reflected both the inclusive spirit and the harsh realities of early Rome. But there was one thing Romulus lacked: women. The early Roman men were faced with a daunting challenge. To build a thriving community, they needed families, and without women, their hopes would crumble. As fate would have it, nearby tribes, particularly the Sabines, held the key to Romulus's dream. The Sabines were known for their beauty and strength, and their women embodied the qualities the Romans sought. Romulus knew that to forge a future for his city, he had to take a bold and controversial step. As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Romulus prepared for the festival of Neptune, a celebration meant to honor the god of the sea. The festival was an elaborate affair filled with music, dancing, and feasting, a perfect setting for what Romulus had in mind. Under the guise of celebration, he plotted the abduction of Sabine women, a decision that would change the course of history and ignite a firestorm of emotions. The day of the festival arrived, and the air was electric with excitement. Romans and Sabines mingled, unaware of the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Romulus, with his heart racing, felt the weight of his decision. As the festivities reached their peak, he signaled his men, and chaos erupted. In a whirlwind of confusion, the Roman men seized the Sabine women, whisking them away to their new home. Imagine the heartbreak and terror in the eyes of those women, torn from their families and the lives they knew. The cries of their loved ones echoed in the air, a haunting melody of despair that would linger in the hearts of all involved. For the women, the initial shock gave way to a profound sense of loss. Many were snatched from loved ones, their futures uncertain, their hopes shattered. Yet, amid this tragedy, a remarkable transformation began. In time, the women learned to adapt, finding strength in their new roles as wives and mothers. They forged bonds with their captors, often becoming the very fabric of the new society. Their courage and resilience became a testament to the human spirit, a beacon of hope amid darkness. Some would say that their influence helped shape the character of Rome itself. The very act of abduction turned into a complex tale of love, loyalty, and identity. In the aftermath of the abduction, a bitter conflict erupted between the Romans and the Sabines, the tension boiling over as both sides fought for their families and their future. The women, once mere pawns in a brutal game, rose as powerful figures in their own right, refusing to be defined solely by their circumstances. They became peacemakers, stepping into the conflict to mend the rift between the two groups. Their voices, once silenced by fear, now rang out with strength and determination. Key figures emerged in this story, weaving a tapestry of emotions and events that would echo through history. Romulus, though a conqueror, faced the ghosts of his past with every decision he made. The Sabine leaders, fighting for their honor and their families, felt the weight of their loss, their hearts heavy with the desire to reclaim what was taken from them. And the women, caught in the middle, became the unsung heroines of this tale, their stories often overlooked in the annals of history. As Rome blossomed from its troubled beginnings, the echoes of this story would shape its future. The values of strength, resilience, and unity born from this turbulent time laid the groundwork for a civilization that would one day rule the world. The heart of early Rome beat with the rhythm of passion and pain, a city forever marked by the complexities of its founding, a story of loss, love, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. In ancient Rome, values and beliefs wove together like threads in a rich tapestry, shaping the lives of its people. At the heart of Roman culture was the family, a sacred institution that stood as a pillar of society. The family was more than just a unit, it was a source of identity, pride, and honor. The bonds formed within these walls were strong, echoing the very essence of what it meant to be Roman. The head of the family, the paterfamilias, held immense power and responsibility. This was no easy burden. He was not just a provider, he was a protector, a moral guide, and a figure of authority. His word was law within the household, and his decisions shaped the lives of all who lived under his roof. The weight of his role was felt in every corner of the home, where the safety and future of his family rested on his shoulders. But beneath the surface of authority lay a complex web of emotions. The relationships within the family were intricate and deeply felt. Sons looked up to their fathers, hoping to gain wisdom and strength. Daughters were cherished and protected, embodying the family's honor. The love within these relationships was profound, often mingled with expectations and societal norms. A father's pride in his son's achievements was matched only by his sorrow over any perceived failure. For women, life was a delicate balancing act. While they were revered as the heart of the home, their roles were often defined by the men in their lives. A wife was expected to manage the household, raise children, and uphold the family's reputation. Yet, in this confined space, women found their own strength. They were not just caregivers, they were the emotional anchors of the family, weaving love and support into every interaction. When a woman became a mother, a profound transformation took place. The bond between mother and child was a fierce and tender connection, filled with joy and sacrifice. A mother would do anything to protect her children, guiding them through the complexities of life. The pain of childbirth was seen as a noble sacrifice, and the love a mother felt for her child was immeasurable. These moments were filled with the essence of humanity, a glimpse into the heart of Roman life. As families grew, so did their ties to the community. Roman society placed a high value on loyalty and honor. Families were expected to support one another, standing together through thick and thin. Celebrations marked life's milestones, weddings, births, and festivals, all steeped in tradition and infused with a sense of belonging. These moments forged connections that would last a lifetime, creating a network of support and love that defined the Roman experience. Religion was another cornerstone of Roman life, a force that influenced every aspect of existence. The Romans were deeply spiritual, believing in a multitude of gods and goddesses who governed the forces of nature and human fate. Each deity held power over specific aspects of life, and honoring them was essential for maintaining harmony. The air was thick with the weight of rituals, sacrifices, and prayers, each performed with the hope of pleasing the gods and securing their favor. The sacred flame burned brightly in every household, a symbol of devotion to the gods and ancestors. The Lares and Penates, household gods, were worshipped daily, ensuring the family's protection and well-being. Each morning, as the sun kissed the earth, prayers were whispered and offerings were made, reinforcing the bond between the divine and the domestic. Families gathered around the hearth, sharing stories and giving thanks for the blessings they received. In these moments, the warmth of family life intertwined with the sacred, creating a sanctuary of love and faith. Public religious ceremonies also played a vital role in the Roman way of life. Festivals and rituals brought communities together, filling the streets with color and joy. The festival of Saturnalia, for example, transformed the city into a celebration of freedom and revelry, where social hierarchies faded away, if only for a moment. People exchanged gifts, decorated their homes, and feasted with abandon. It was a time of joy and laughter, where the weight of daily struggles lifted, if only briefly. Yet, beneath the vibrant celebrations lay a more serious aspect of Roman spirituality. The augurs, priests who interpreted the will of the gods, held a revered place in society. Their ability to read the signs in nature and predict the future was seen as a divine gift. People sought their guidance before making important decisions, whether in matters of war, politics, or personal life. The fear of offending the gods loomed large, shaping actions and choices with a sense of reverence and caution. The complexities of Roman values, family dynamics, and religious beliefs created a rich emotional landscape. It was a society where love and duty danced together, where joy was often tinged with sorrow. The hopes and dreams of each family intertwined with the collective aspirations of the community, creating a vibrant mosaic of human experience. But the weight of these traditions could also be heavy. The pressure to uphold family honor and adhere to societal expectations sometimes led to heartache. A father's disappointment in a son's failure could fracture the bond they shared, while a daughter's desire for independence might clash with her family's expectations. These struggles were often fought in silence, the emotions locked away in the hearts of those who lived them. Despite the challenges, the strength of the Roman spirit shone brightly. The resilience of families, the love that bound them, and the faith that guided them created a foundation that would withstand the test of time. Through every trial and triumph, the Romans carried their values with them, a testament to their unwavering belief in family, duty, and the divine. As the sun set over the hills of Rome, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the warmth of family life lingered in the air. Each home, filled with laughter and love, whispered stories of hope, dreams, and the intricate dance of human emotion. The legacy of ancient Rome was not merely built on conquest and power, it was forged in the hearts of its people, where values, family, and faith intermingled in a timeless embrace. The Italian peninsula stands as a breathtaking masterpiece, a land where rolling hills meet shimmering seas, and the mountains stretch toward the sky. This land, filled with beauty and promise, was more than just a backdrop for the rise of Rome, it was a crucial player in the story of ancient civilization. Each valley, river, and hill told a story of its own, shaping the lives of those who called it home. Italy's landscape is a diverse tapestry, woven together by nature's artistry. In the north, the majestic Alps tower over the land, their snow-capped peaks casting shadows over the valleys below. These mountains served as a formidable barrier, protecting the Italian tribes from outside invasions while also isolating them from one another. The air is crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. The mountains were not just a physical boundary, they became a source of legends and stories, a place where heroes would venture and return transformed. As one descends from the alpine heights, the scenery shifts dramatically. The Po River, Italy's longest river, flows through the fertile plains, bringing life to the land. These plains, rich and bountiful, nurtured agriculture and fostered communities. Farmers tilled the soil, their hands stained with earth, while families gathered at harvest time, their hearts filled with gratitude for the fruits of their labor. Here, the rhythm of life pulsed with the changing seasons, each cycle bringing hope and abundance. The laughter of children echoed in the fields, and the promise of a bright future flourished among the crops. Traveling further south, the Apennine Mountains snaked down the peninsula like a backbone, dividing the country into eastern and western halves. These mountains were both a source of beauty and a challenge for the people living in their shadows. Villages clung to the slopes, their homes built from stone, weathered by time and nature. The community spirit thrived in these remote places, as neighbors relied on one another for support. Here, traditions were passed down through generations, and stories were shared around fires, echoing through the valleys under the starry sky. Nestled between these mountains and hills lay coastal regions that hugged the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. The sea was a lifeblood for the early Italians, offering resources, trade routes, and a gateway to the wider world. Fishermen cast their nets into the sparkling blue waters, while merchants navigated the waves to distant lands. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks provided a soothing backdrop to everyday life, instilling a sense of wonder about what lay beyond the horizon. Each sunrise brought new opportunities, filling hearts with dreams of exploration and adventure. The Italian peninsula was not just home to the Romans, it was a mosaic of diverse tribes and cultures. To the north, the Etruscans thrived, their cities bustling with trade and innovation. They were skilled artisans, known for their beautiful pottery and intricate metalwork. Their influence shaped early Roman culture, blending rich traditions and fostering a sense of shared identity. The Etruscans built magnificent cities, their temples reaching for the heavens, and their tombs adorned with vibrant frescoes that told stories of their lives and beliefs. Moving south, the Latins occupied the central region, including the area around Rome. These tribes were fiercely proud, with a deep connection to the land that sustained them. They lived in simple homes, cultivating crops and raising livestock, but their hearts burned with ambition. The Latins were warriors and farmers, poets and dreamers, their spirits entwined with the soil they worked. They often gathered to share tales of their ancestors, celebrating the bond that connected them to their past and to each other. To the east, along the Adriatic coast, the Greeks had established colonies that brought with them a wealth of knowledge, art, and philosophy. Their influence seeped into the hearts of the local tribes, sparking creativity and inspiring generations. The Greek gods were worshipped alongside the Roman deities, their stories intertwined in a rich tapestry of beliefs that shaped the spiritual lives of the people. The sun-soaked shores were filled with laughter and joy, as families gathered to celebrate life, love, and the beauty of the world around them. As these tribes interacted, alliances were formed, and rivalries ignited. The rich geography of Italy made it a strategic crossroads, attracting traders and conquerors alike. The fertile plains and access to the sea offered a bounty of resources, while the mountains provided natural fortifications. This unique landscape not only supported a variety of cultures but also set the stage for conflict and competition. The promise of prosperity and the threat of invasion kept the tribes on their toes, forging a spirit of resilience and adaptability. The strategic importance of Italy cannot be overstated. With its location at the center of the Mediterranean, it served as a bridge between the cultures of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Trade routes crisscrossed the region, connecting distant lands and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and innovations. The bustling markets were alive with color and sound, where merchants haggled over spices, textiles, and precious metals. The spirit of commerce thrived, and with it came the seeds of prosperity and ambition. The Italian peninsula became a melting pot of cultures, each group adding its flavor to the rich mix that defined the region. As stories of glory and tragedy unfolded, the land itself became a character in the narrative, a witness to the dreams and struggles of its people. It was a place where laughter mingled with tears, where the bonds of family and community were tested and strengthened by the trials of life. The geography of ancient Italy was a backdrop for human emotion, a stage where the triumphs and sorrows of its inhabitants played out against stunning vistas. Every hill and valley, river and mountain held memories of love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. As the sun set over the hills, casting a golden glow on the land, the dreams of those who lived there echoed through the ages, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people connected by their geography, their history, and their hearts. Long before Rome emerged as a powerful empire, Italy was a land rich with diverse tribal societies, each with its own unique identity, culture, and traditions. These tribes roamed the hills and valleys, their lives intertwined with the land they cherished. The stories of the Sabines, Latins, and Etruscans are not just historical accounts, they are tales of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between people and their homeland. The Sabines were known for their fierce spirit and warrior culture. They inhabited the mountainous regions of central Italy, where the rugged terrain mirrored their strong and resilient nature. Their society was built around family and community, with each member playing a vital role in maintaining the fabric of their tribe. The Sabines valued bravery and honor, often celebrating their warriors with grand feasts and festivals. When the drums of war echoed through their valleys, the Sabine men answered the call, wielding their weapons with pride. They were not just fighting for their lives, but for their families and their land. The bond between a warrior and his family was sacred, with the promise to protect them etched in every heart. Their battles were fierce, but even amid the chaos, there was a profound sense of unity. The Sabine women held an equally important place in their society. While the men were out fighting, the women tended to the home, nurturing the next generation and preserving their traditions. Their strength shone in the quiet moments, teaching their children the stories of their ancestors and instilling values of courage and honor. During festivals, the Sabine women would come alive with joy, dancing and singing, their laughter echoing through the hills. It was during these celebrations that the spirit of their tribe truly thrived, binding everyone together in a shared experience of love and hope. To the south, the Latins lived, a people defined by their connection to the land and their dreams for the future. The Latins were primarily farmers, cultivating the rich soil that provided sustenance for their families. Their villages dotted the landscape, each one a community filled with life and laughter. The sound of children playing filled the air as parents watched with pride, their hearts swelling with the joy of watching their little ones grow. Family was the cornerstone of Latin society, where bonds were formed in the warmth of shared meals and laughter. The patriarchs led with a mix of authority and tenderness, guiding their families while also nurturing their dreams. The Latin spirit was alive in their festivals, where neighbors came together to celebrate the harvest, dance under the stars, and share stories that echoed through time. In contrast to the Sabines and Latins, the Etruscans were a civilization marked by innovation and sophistication. They occupied the northern regions of Italy, building cities that would lay the groundwork for future urban life. The Etruscans were skilled artisans, renowned for their exquisite pottery, jewelry, and intricate metalwork. Their craftsmanship told stories of their lives, and each piece was infused with the love and labor of its maker. Etruscan society was organized and structured, with a strong focus on religion and the afterlife. They believed in a pantheon of gods and placed great importance on rituals and ceremonies. The Etruscans honored their ancestors, often building elaborate tombs adorned with beautiful frescoes. These tombs were not just final resting places, they were gateways to the afterlife, filled with the possessions that the deceased would need in their journey beyond. Families would gather to pay their respects, a touching reminder of the enduring connection between the living and the dead. While the Etruscans were focused on the divine, their communities thrived on collaboration and mutual support. The strength of their society lay in the bonds between neighbors as they worked together to cultivate the land and build their cities. The Etruscans enjoyed vibrant festivals filled with music, dance, and feasting. These celebrations created a sense of belonging, where joy and sorrow mingled, forming the emotional core of their culture. Throughout these diverse tribes, shared practices and beliefs shaped their identities. While the Sabines emphasized valor and honor, the Latins found strength in family and community. The Etruscans balanced their earthly existence with a deep reverence for the divine. Despite their differences, a common thread of love, loyalty, and resilience ran through each tribe, uniting them in their struggles and triumphs. The landscape of Italy, with its rolling hills and fertile valleys, served as a constant reminder of their shared existence. Each tribe cultivated their land, honoring the earth that provided for them. The beauty of nature inspired poets and storytellers, who crafted tales of love and heroism that would echo through generations. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the valleys, the tribes gathered around fires, sharing stories that warmed their hearts. The flickering flames illuminated faces filled with laughter and tears, as the past and present intertwined in a dance of memory and hope. The bonds formed during these gatherings were unbreakable, reminding each tribe of the power of unity and love. Through the trials they faced, the challenges of war, the hardships of life, the tribes of pre-Roman Italy found strength in their connections. They cherished their families, celebrated their cultures, and honored their gods, weaving a rich tapestry of life that would leave a lasting legacy. In the quiet moments, as the stars twinkled above, the dreams of these ancient people shimmered like distant constellations, guiding future generations toward a shared destiny. The stories of the Sabines, Latins, and Etruscans remind us that even in the face of uncertainty, the bonds of love and community can light the way, shaping the heart of a nation. In the heart of ancient societies, women stood as pillars of strength, their lives woven into the very fabric of their communities. They were not just wives and mothers, they were nurturers, warriors in their own right, and keepers of tradition. Their stories are often untold, yet they carry the weight of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Among the tribes of ancient Italy, women played vital roles that extended far beyond the confines of their homes. In the Sabine community, for example, women were celebrated not only for their beauty but for their bravery and wisdom. When the Sabine men went to war, their women stood resolute, managing households and farms, ensuring that life continued in their absence. They bore the heavy burden of expectation, knowing their husbands were out fighting for their honor and safety. This connection between men and women was profound. The strength of a warrior was mirrored in the strength of his wife, who held the home together during turbulent times. Marriage in Sabine society was a significant event, marked by elaborate ceremonies that celebrated the union of two families. The bride was adorned in her finest attire, a symbol of her family's pride and legacy. Yet, this joyous occasion often came with the weight of expectations. Women were expected to marry and bear children, solidifying alliances between families and ensuring the continuation of traditions. The love between husband and wife was nurtured through shared responsibilities and mutual respect, but it was not always easy. In the midst of the celebrations, whispers of anxiety sometimes danced in the air. Women longed for love and companionship but often found themselves bound by societal norms that dictated their choices. The joy of marriage was often shadowed by the fear of not fulfilling expectations. The Sabine woman would walk the delicate line between duty and desire, balancing her heart's yearnings with her role as a wife and mother. The Latins, too, held women in high regard, though their roles were shaped by different traditions. Latin society emphasized family, and women were seen as the heart of the household. A wife was not just a partner, she was the nurturer, the one who ensured the family's well-being. Mothers played a crucial role in shaping their children's futures, instilling values and traditions that would carry on for generations. Latin women were often involved in agricultural work, toiling alongside their husbands in the fields. They understood the land, its rhythms, and its needs. Together, they faced the challenges of farming, cultivating crops that would sustain their families and communities. The sweat on their brows and the dirt under their nails told stories of hard work and determination. Each harvest brought not just food but a sense of accomplishment, a testament to their collective strength. Marriage among the Latins was a cherished institution, filled with rituals and customs that honored family ties. Love could blossom from these unions, nurtured by shared experiences and dreams. Yet, like the Sabine women, the Latins faced societal expectations. They were often married young, their futures planned out for them, leaving little room for personal choice. The dreams of young girls, who imagined love stories of their own, were sometimes replaced by the harsh reality of obligation. Then there were the Etruscans, a society known for its sophistication and artistry. Etruscan women enjoyed a status that was often more elevated than their counterparts in other tribes. They had the right to own property, manage businesses, and participate in religious rituals. The Etruscans honored their women, recognizing their contributions to society. In some cases, women were even depicted in artwork alongside men, suggesting a level of respect and equality that was rare for the time. Etruscan marriages were characterized by a sense of partnership. Love was not merely an ideal, it was often a foundation upon which families were built. Women had a voice in choosing their partners, and these unions could be based on mutual respect and affection. This freedom allowed Etruscan women to flourish, participating in cultural life and contributing to the vibrant tapestry of their society. The Etruscans also had unique customs surrounding family life. They believed in honoring ancestors and celebrated the connections between generations. This reverence for family extended to women, who were often seen as the bearers of lineage and tradition. The role of a mother was sacred, and Etruscan women embraced their responsibilities with grace and devotion. They raised their children with love, teaching them about their heritage and instilling values that would guide them through life. Despite the differences among these tribes, the experiences of women in ancient Italy were often marked by the same universal themes: love, sacrifice, and the struggle for agency. Across the hills and valleys, women faced the reality of societal norms that shaped their lives. They yearned for love, but often found themselves navigating the complexities of arranged marriages and familial expectations. The emotions tied to these experiences ran deep. A young woman might dream of romance, only to face the stark reality of her family's plans for her future. On the day of her wedding, she might stand at the altar, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. Would her husband be kind? Would he honor her? As she took her vows, she felt the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders, a reminder of her duty to family and society. Amidst these challenges, the bonds of sisterhood often offered solace. Women would gather, sharing their hopes and fears, supporting one another through the trials of life. These connections created a network of strength, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. In the quiet moments, when the world felt heavy, they would find comfort in each other's laughter, their shared stories echoing like a warm embrace. In every tribe, women found ways to express their voices, whether through art, song, or storytelling. They wove tales of love and bravery, their words capturing the essence of their experiences. These stories transcended generations, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who listened. The emotional depth of their lives resonated through time, echoing the struggles and triumphs of women who dared to dream. As the sun set over the hills of ancient Italy, casting a golden hue across the landscape, the women of these tribes carried their stories forward. Each heartbeat was a testament to their resilience, a reminder of their unwavering spirit. They may have faced challenges, but they also embraced joy, love, and the indomitable bond of family. Their lives were a beautiful mosaic, reflecting the strength, courage, and love that defined the heart of ancient society. In the heart of Rome, where cobblestone streets pulse with history, a tale of two brothers echoes through time, capturing the imagination of all who hear it. Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were said to be born of a noble lineage, their story steeped in myth and marked by tragedy. As the sun sets over the ancient city, casting a warm glow on the ruins, the tale of their beginning stirs deep emotions, a blend of hope and sorrow that resonates through the ages. According to the myth, Romulus and Remus were the twin sons of Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and Mars, the god of war. Their birth was not just extraordinary, it was drenched in divine significance. However, their lives were shrouded in danger from the very start. Fearful of the twins' potential to seize power, King Amulius ordered them to be thrown into the Tiber River, a cruel attempt to eradicate a threat to his reign. But fate had other plans. The river cradled them, and a she-wolf, drawn by the cries of the infants, found them. She nurtured the boys, feeding them with her milk and sheltering them in her den. This image of the she-wolf nursing the twins is a poignant symbol of survival against all odds. It reflects the nurturing spirit that can emerge from even the harshest circumstances. The boys grew strong, their bond unbreakable as they faced the world together. Together, they experienced the wild beauty of nature, their laughter ringing out in the hills, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As they grew, Romulus and Remus learned of their true heritage. Anger bubbled within them, fueled by the injustice of their early life. They rallied their friends, and with fierce determination, the twins set out to reclaim their rightful place. They overthrew King Amulius, restoring their grandfather, Numitor, to the throne. This act of bravery resonated with all who heard the tale. It spoke to the belief in justice and the power of unity in the face of adversity. Yet, the story of Romulus and Remus does not end in triumph. The bond between the twins, once a source of strength, became the backdrop for tragedy. As they planned to build a city, a bitter conflict arose. Romulus favored one hill, while Remus preferred another. Their differing visions ignited a fierce argument, one that would lead to a heart-wrenching decision. In a moment fueled by passion and anger, Romulus struck down his brother, a devastating act that left an indelible mark on his soul. This moment captures the essence of human nature, the complexity of love and rivalry. Romulus, now alone, stood atop the Palatine Hill, overwhelmed by both the weight of his victory and the loss of his beloved brother. As he looked out over the land, he felt the pain of betrayal and the burden of leadership. The dream of a new city was now tainted by blood, a reminder that greatness often comes at a terrible cost. The founding of Rome, though wrapped in myth, offers a glimpse into the early society's values and beliefs. It reflects the duality of human experience, the struggle between ambition and compassion, the fight for justice tinged with personal sacrifice. This story of Romulus and Remus became the heart of Rome's identity, a narrative that resonated with its citizens for centuries. As historians sift through the sands of time, seeking to separate myth from reality, they uncover layers of complexity. Archaeological evidence hints at the existence of a settlement along the Tiber River, where the story of Romulus and Remus could have taken root. The narrative embodies the aspirations of early Romans, who sought to explain their origins and provide a sense of purpose. While the historical accuracy of the tale may remain elusive, the emotions it evokes are undeniable. The story of Romulus and Remus transcends time, offering lessons that remain relevant today. It speaks of the power of family bonds, the struggle for identity, and the sacrifices made in pursuit of dreams. In the end, the legend of Rome's founding serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between hope and despair. Romulus, forever haunted by his actions, became the first king of Rome, leading a city built on both triumph and tragedy. As the sun sets over the ancient ruins, the ghosts of the past linger in the air, whispering the stories of love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. The tale of Romulus and Remus, while steeped in myth, captures the essence of humanity, reminding us of the complexities that shape our existence. In the cradle of history, where the past whispers through the ancient stones, the early Roman Republic emerges like a flickering flame, filled with ambition and conflict. After the turbulent birth of Rome, the newly formed city stood as a beacon of hope, a place where dreams could flourish. Yet, within this hope lay the seeds of tension that would lead to one of the most heart-wrenching conflicts in its young history, the struggle with the Sabines. The early Roman Republic was born from the ashes of monarchy, ushering in a new political structure that emphasized shared power. It was a time of experimentation, as the people of Rome sought to create a government that could balance authority and liberty. The Senate, composed of noble families, became the backbone of this new system, guiding the city with wisdom and tradition. Yet, power was not concentrated solely in the hands of the few. The creation of the office of consuls, two elected leaders who served for a single year, embodied the Roman belief in accountability and the fear of tyranny. This dual leadership was a safeguard against corruption, allowing the people to feel a sense of control over their destiny. But the heart of the Republic beat with the pulse of its citizens. The assemblies, where free men gathered to discuss laws and elect leaders, brought a sense of unity and purpose. In these spaces, voices were raised, dreams shared, and the aspirations of the people echoed like a harmonious song. The hope for a better future intertwined with the stories of their ancestors, creating a rich tapestry of identity. Yet, beneath this surface of cooperation, simmered tensions that threatened to tear the young republic apart. As the Republic grew, so did its population. Many of the early Romans were refugees, outcasts from neighboring tribes who sought refuge in the city. They longed for a new beginning, a chance to build families and futures in a place that offered promise. But Rome, while welcoming, could not satisfy the deep-seated human need for connection and belonging. The city's men, strong and determined, found themselves yearning for wives, companions to share their lives with. This yearning sparked a crucial turning point in the history of Rome. With no nearby women to marry, the Roman leaders faced a dilemma that would ignite tensions with the Sabines. The growing population created a pressing need for women to sustain families and ensure the continuation of their lineage. Driven by desperation, Romulus, the founder of Rome, sought to resolve this issue in a way that would ultimately haunt him. He orchestrated a daring plan to abduct women from the neighboring Sabine tribe. The infamous festival of Neptune became the backdrop for this fateful event. As the Romans celebrated, the air was thick with excitement and laughter, the clinking of cups and the rhythms of music reverberating through the hills. But beneath the joy lay an undercurrent of deceit. Romulus and his men, their hearts racing with both hope and trepidation, executed their plan. In a moment that would echo through history, they seized the Sabine women, pulling them away from their families and homes. The cries of the abducted women pierced the revelry, their voices filled with confusion and fear. They were caught in a whirlwind of emotion, torn from the lives they knew. Their eyes, once filled with joy and laughter, now mirrored the heartbreak of separation. The weight of this act weighed heavily on the shoulders of the Roman men. They knew they had crossed a line, one that would lead to unimaginable consequences. This moment marked a turning point not only for the women but also for the city of Rome itself. The abduction ignited the rage of the Sabines, who felt betrayed and humiliated. They were warriors, fiercely protective of their families and their honor. In the face of this injustice, they rallied together, fueled by love for their daughters and sisters who had been taken. Their hearts, filled with anger and sorrow, drove them to march on Rome, determined to reclaim what had been lost. As the Sabine warriors approached, a sense of foreboding enveloped the young city. The clash between the Romans and Sabines would not just be a battle of strength, but a heartbreaking struggle between love and loyalty. The men of Rome, now faced with the consequences of their actions, grappled with feelings of guilt and fear. They had fought to build a new life, but now they faced the wrath of their neighbors. The ensuing conflict was fierce, a storm of emotions swirling on the battlefield. The sounds of clashing swords mingled with the cries of anguish from both sides. It was a fight not just for territory but for dignity and respect. The Sabine women, caught in the crossfire, watched with heavy hearts as the men they had been torn from fought against the men who had taken them. In those moments, the depth of their anguish became palpable, a reminder of the fragile nature of human relationships. Amidst the chaos, the strength of the women shone through. They stood as witnesses to the turmoil, their spirits unbroken even in the face of despair. They became a bridge between two worlds, filled with longing for their families but also a deepening connection to their captors. In an extraordinary twist of fate, the women intervened, rushing to the battlefield to plead for peace. Their voices, filled with desperation and love, cut through the noise of war, reaching the hearts of both sides. In that heart-stopping moment, the realization struck like lightning: the bonds of family and love transcended the conflict. The women, having been torn from their homes, now found themselves in a place where they could shape their destinies. Their courage to speak out and demand reconciliation opened the door to an unexpected resolution. The Romans and Sabines, once enemies, found a path toward unity, their shared humanity shining brighter than their differences. The early Roman Republic, marked by its struggle for identity and community, evolved through the actions of both men and women. The governance and political structures they forged would lay the groundwork for a powerful city. But the true strength of Rome emerged not just from its leaders or its military prowess, but from the heart of its people, their capacity for love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the young republic began to heal. The mingling of the two tribes brought new life and hope. Families were formed, not just through force, but through shared dreams of a brighter future. The legacy of Romulus, the abduction of the Sabine women, and the ensuing conflict became a defining chapter in the story of Rome. It was a tale of ambition and betrayal, but ultimately, it was a narrative of connection and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love has the power to heal and unite. In the fledgling days of Rome, a city pulsing with ambition and hope, the air was thick with promise and urgency. The early Romans, a determined group of men and women, had carved out a new home for themselves on the banks of the Tiber River, but the sun was rising on a dilemma that threatened their dreams. As the city grew, its population dynamics revealed a stark truth: the men of Rome needed women, not just for companionship, but as vital threads in the tapestry of society. The streets of early Rome were alive with the energy of young men eager to build their futures. They had dreams of conquest, power, and legacy, but as their numbers increased, they began to feel an aching void in their hearts. In a world where family and lineage mattered more than anything, the absence of women became a haunting reminder of their limitations. Each celebration, every festival filled with laughter and camaraderie, echoed with a profound silence where the voices of wives and mothers should have been. The yearning for women was not merely a personal longing, it was a societal necessity. Families were the foundation of Roman life, and without women, the very fabric of their community was at risk. Sons needed mothers to teach them values, daughters were essential to carry on their names, and the bonds of marriage would strengthen ties between families and tribes. The absence of women posed a threat to growth, stability, and the future of Rome itself. In a world driven by ambition, the role of marriage evolved into something deeply strategic. Each union was not just a merging of hearts, but a powerful alliance between families. The stakes were high, marriages were political tools, forging connections that could alter the course of destiny. This connection was vital in a society where loyalty and kinship could determine life or death. Each new marriage was a chance to create partnerships that would yield strength and security for generations to come. As the young men of Rome gazed upon the surrounding hills and valleys, their hearts raced with the thought of neighboring tribes. They understood that these tribes were not just enemies or strangers, they were potential allies, waiting for the right moment to unite. The necessity of women loomed large in the minds of the Roman leaders. Marrying into these tribes would not only secure bonds, but also ensure the growth of their city. Yet the urgency behind this need was layered with emotion. The dream of a family was a powerful motivator. The early Romans were driven by visions of laughter filling their homes, the joy of children playing in the streets, and the warmth of a loving partner by their side. The longing for love and connection ran deep within them, mingling with their ambitions. However, the reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on their hearts. The men of Rome found themselves facing a desperate choice, one that would define the trajectory of their young republic. The women of neighboring tribes held their hopes and dreams in their hands. Their absence was felt in every corner of the city, and the loneliness became almost unbearable. It was not just a longing for companionship, it was a yearning for the very essence of what it meant to be a family, to build a future, and to carry on their names. Faced with the dire need for women, the leaders of Rome contemplated a daring and controversial plan. The thought of seizing women from the neighboring Sabines echoed through the hearts of the Romans like a siren's call. It was a desperate act, born from the longing for family and the desire for unity, yet it was also fraught with moral complexity. The dream of a thriving community clashed with the harsh reality of forced separation and heartbreak. As the sun set on the hills surrounding Rome, the weight of the impending decision hung in the air. The laughter of the men who longed for their future mingled with the sound of solemn contemplation. In their hearts, they understood that their actions would have consequences, both for themselves and for the women they would take. The visions of a unified Rome and the image of families standing together were woven together in a fragile balance. In that moment, the urgency of their need became painfully clear. The dreams of love and connection were intertwined with the harsh realities of their world. With each passing day, the longing for women grew stronger, fueling a determination that would lead to the most heart-wrenching chapter in their history. The stakes were high, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. The need for women in early Rome was not just about survival, it was a deep-seated desire for love, family, and community. It spoke to the fundamental human experience of longing for connection, a need that transcended politics and power. As the Romans set their plans into motion, they were propelled by a hope that was as fragile as it was powerful. In the quiet moments of reflection, they held on to the belief that love could be born even from the most desperate of circumstances, and that families could flourish in the shadow of adversity. Yet, as the sun rose on the day of reckoning, the consequences of their actions loomed like a storm on the horizon. The choices they were about to make would forever change the course of their history, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of all involved. The intertwining paths of longing, love, and loss would come to define not just their future, but the very essence of what it meant to be Roman. The sun cast a golden glow over the hills surrounding early Rome, illuminating the faces of its people, who were filled with both hope and desperation. Among them was Romulus, the city's founder, a man driven by a vision for his fledgling city. Yet, beneath his determination lay a growing anxiety that gripped his heart. The Romans, a vibrant and ambitious people, had established a home, but they lacked the essential foundation of family. Without women to share their lives and raise children, the future of Rome hung precariously in the balance. Romulus felt the weight of responsibility resting heavily on his shoulders. He envisioned a thriving community filled with laughter, love, and the promise of generations to come. Yet the reality was stark. The men of Rome were surrounded by neighbors, tribes brimming with potential allies, but there was a significant barrier: women. The absence of female companionship left a void that echoed through the city. The longing for connection fueled Romulus's thoughts as he sought a solution that would forge a brighter future for his people. In the depths of his heart, Romulus devised a plan that would change everything. It was audacious, fraught with risks, and steeped in moral ambiguity, but desperation often gives birth to bold actions. He understood that the nearby Sabine tribe had women who were strong, vibrant, and would play an integral role in shaping the community. He envisioned a grand festival to lure the Sabines to Rome, where the bonds of friendship could be formed under the guise of celebration. The festival was designed to dazzle the senses, a celebration of Neptune, the god of the sea. The air would be filled with the sound of music and laughter, the aroma of roasted meats, and the warmth of camaraderie. Romulus envisioned it as an invitation, a chance to create alliances, but it was also a ruse. Behind the facade of joy lay a darker purpose: the abduction of the Sabine women. As the day approached, excitement rippled through Rome. The men prepared for the festival, their spirits buoyed by the promise of connection. But beneath that excitement lay a tension, a sense of impending conflict. The men were eager, but there was also a palpable fear of the consequences of their actions. They knew they were about to cross a line, one that could forever alter the landscape of their lives and their city. The festival began with a jubilant atmosphere. The people danced, sang, and feasted under the bright blue sky, while Romulus moved among the guests, charming the Sabines with his charisma and leadership. He welcomed them into the heart of Rome, enveloping them in the warmth of friendship. As the laughter echoed through the hills, the tension grew within the Roman men. They knew that the moment of truth was drawing near. When the time was right, Romulus raised his hand, silencing the music and gathering everyone's attention. In that moment, he presented a vision of unity, a call for the men to come together in a spirit of camaraderie. As he spoke, his voice resonated with passion, igniting a sense of urgency among his people. The Roman men exchanged glances filled with determination, their hearts racing with a mix of excitement and fear. With a signal from Romulus, the plan unfolded like a dark wave crashing over the shores of their celebration. The Roman men surged forward, moving with a purpose that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. They approached the Sabine women, whose faces reflected confusion and surprise. In that fleeting moment, as the reality of the abduction sank in, the joyous laughter turned to cries of alarm. The emotional weight of the abduction was overwhelming. The Roman men, once filled with the thrill of excitement, were now faced with the stark reality of their actions. As they seized the women, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The joy of the festival was shattered, replaced by screams that cut through the air like knives. The men's hearts raced with adrenaline, yet within them grew a tumultuous mix of emotions: excitement, fear, guilt, and a growing sense of regret. The Sabine women, torn from their families and homes, faced a storm of emotions. Confusion gripped them, a whirlwind of fear and disbelief as they were pulled from the celebrations they had once enjoyed. The dreams they held of love, family, and a future were suddenly snatched away, leaving them feeling lost and alone. Their cries echoed in the hearts of the Roman men, who began to realize the weight of their actions. Yet, even in the midst of this chaos, some Roman men felt a flicker of hope. They believed that in time, love could bloom from this desperation. The abduction, while born from a place of need, could pave the way for new families and alliances. They thought that perhaps, amidst the pain of separation, they could create bonds that would transform their city. As the dust settled from the tumultuous events of the festival, the reality of what had transpired began to take root. The Roman men returned to their homes with the women, but the air was thick with an unspoken tension. The women's eyes, once filled with fear, held a mixture of anger and sorrow. They were no longer mere objects of desire. They were individuals, each with their own dreams, hopes, and heartbreaks. The abduction had ignited a fierce conflict between the Romans and the Sabines, a battle that would leave scars on both sides. The women, taken from their families, now faced an uncertain future. Their voices, once filled with joy, were replaced by a heavy silence, and the reality of their situation loomed over them like a dark cloud. Romulus, standing amidst the aftermath of his actions, felt the weight of what he had done. The desire to build a future for Rome had led him down a path he had never truly wanted to tread. The vibrant tapestry he envisioned was now marred by heartbreak, loss, and an impending war that would test the very fabric of his new society. In that moment of reflection, the realization struck hard: the yearning for family and community had driven them to this point, but at what cost? The struggle for love and connection had turned into a heartbreaking tale of loss and desperation. As the sun set over the hills of Rome, its rays cast long shadows, a reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of unity, and the price of ambition that the early Romans would pay. The air buzzed with excitement as the sun began to rise over Rome, casting a warm golden light across the bustling city. It was the day of the festival of Neptune, a celebration that promised joy, laughter, and a chance for the young city to showcase its spirit. Men and women dressed in their finest garments adorned with bright colors and intricate designs. The aroma of roasting meats and freshly baked bread wafted through the streets, stirring appetites and drawing people to the festivities. Children giggled and ran through the crowds, their laughter ringing like music, while musicians played cheerful tunes that lifted everyone's spirits. This festival held great significance for the people of Rome. It was not just a day of merriment, it was a tribute to Neptune, the god of the sea. The Romans believed that honoring him would bring good fortune, safe voyages, and prosperity. Families gathered to express their hopes for a fruitful future, their dreams entwined with the blessings of the god. The atmosphere was electric, with anticipation mingling with the scent of flowers, fruits, and sweet wine. As the sun rose higher, the festival reached a fever pitch. The streets were alive with activity. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and crowds thronged the plaza, their faces radiant with joy. But beneath the surface of this jubilation lay a secret plan, one that would shatter the happiness of the day and change the lives of many forever. Romulus, the founder of Rome, moved among the people, his charisma drawing others to him like moths to a flame. He spoke passionately about unity and the future of Rome, his voice carrying over the sounds of laughter and music. He painted a picture of hope, one where families could thrive together, and the city would become a beacon of strength and prosperity. But his heart raced, knowing that this was more than just a celebration, it was a moment of reckoning. As the festivities unfolded, Romulus's eyes flicked towards the horizon, where the Sabines were approaching. The invitation had been sent, and now they were here to share in the joy of the day. The sight of their beautiful women, unaware of the darker intentions, filled him with conflicting emotions. Would they ever understand the desperation that drove the Romans to such lengths? When the Sabine women arrived, adorned in their own colorful garments and radiant with excitement, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The men of Rome greeted them with warm smiles, but there was an underlying tension, an urgency that pulsed through the crowd. This was the moment they had prepared for, yet each Roman man felt the weight of what was about to happen. As the festivities carried on, the sounds of music and laughter became a backdrop to the darker purpose looming over the celebration. The Roman men exchanged knowing glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had been charged with a sacred task, one that would secure the future of their city, but at a terrible price. Romulus raised his hand, calling for silence amidst the jubilant noise. The crowd quieted, turning to face him, their eyes filled with curiosity and expectation. With a voice strong and commanding, he welcomed everyone to the festival, expressing his gratitude to the Sabines for joining in the celebration. His words were like honey, sweet and enticing, but behind them lay the bitterness of betrayal. As he spoke, the Roman men gathered in small groups, their hearts racing with a mix of excitement and dread. The time had come to execute the plan. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and a collective breath was held as they prepared to set the wheels in motion. With a sudden burst of energy, Romulus gestured toward the games and festivities, encouraging everyone to participate. The sound of cheers rose again as people moved towards the center of the plaza. It was the perfect distraction, a moment where joy could mask the unfolding chaos. In that instant, the Roman men sprang into action. Like a wave crashing upon the shore, they surged forward, their resolve unwavering. They approached the Sabine women, their hearts pounding, knowing they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. The laughter around them faded, replaced by startled gasps and confused expressions. What should have been a day of unity turned into a whirlwind of emotions. The women's faces, once filled with joy and laughter, transformed into masks of shock and fear. Their cries pierced the air, a haunting reminder of the innocence lost in this desperate act. In that moment, the festival became a battleground, the music a distant echo to the reality unfolding before them. As the Roman men grasped the arms of the Sabine women, the atmosphere thickened with an unsettling tension. Some men hesitated, their hearts torn between the excitement of their mission and the horror of what they were doing. Yet the need for survival, for family, surged forward, drowning out the whispers of doubt. The Sabine women, taken by surprise, struggled against the hands that held them, their voices rising in a chorus of protests. The laughter that had once filled the air now transformed into cries of confusion and despair. They looked around at the faces of the men they thought were friends, their expressions now twisted with a different intent. In the chaos, Romulus's heart sank as he witnessed the pain unfolding before him. He had hoped for unity, for love to blossom from the ashes of desperation, but he knew this moment was tainted by violence and loss. The festival, meant to honor Neptune and bless their future, was now a scene of heartbreak. As the women were led away, a heavy silence fell over the plaza, the music fading into a haunting memory. The men who had once been filled with hope now carried the weight of their actions like a shroud. The joy of the festival had turned into a nightmare, the laughter of the day replaced by the bitter taste of regret. Yet even in the darkness, a flicker of hope remained. Romulus believed that love could blossom from this tragedy, that the bonds forged in the chaos could lead to a future where families would thrive. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows over the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that the path they had chosen would leave scars deeper than anyone could imagine. The festival of Neptune, once a day of celebration, became a turning point in the history of Rome, a moment marked by love, loss, and the desperate need for connection. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the weight of the day's events hung heavy in the hearts of all, a stark reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of survival and the price of ambition. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the bustling plaza of Rome as the festival reached its peak. Laughter mingled with music, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats and sweet wine. Everyone was caught up in the joy of the day, unaware that beneath the surface, a dark plan was unfurling, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Romulus stood at the heart of the festivities, he felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The excitement of the day masked the turmoil within. The sound of joyful shouts and cheers rang in his ears, yet he could feel the tension coiling like a spring, ready to explode. He cast his gaze over the crowd, watching the Sabine women as they laughed and danced, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them. Then, at a signal from Romulus, the tide began to turn. The Roman men, who had been waiting for this moment with a mix of eagerness and dread, sprang into action. They moved through the crowd, their hearts pounding with urgency. The festive atmosphere, once filled with joy, shifted into confusion as the Roman men approached the Sabine women with determination. In that moment, chaos erupted. The laughter of the festival turned into screams of terror as the men reached for the women they had come to adore. The surprise was overwhelming. One moment, the women were dancing freely, and the next, they were caught in a whirlwind of panic. The grip of Roman hands, once friendly and welcoming, turned fierce and possessive. "Let go of me," one woman cried, her voice breaking through the laughter that had just moments ago filled the air. The fear in her eyes was palpable as she struggled against the grip of a Roman man, her heart racing. Around her, other women echoed her cries, a chorus of despair rising above the noise of the festival. The joyous atmosphere shattered like glass, leaving only confusion and terror in its wake. The men, fueled by desperation and a vision of a future they believed depended on this act, pressed on with their plan. They pulled the women from their families, their eyes filled with determination, but also a hint of guilt that lingered in the background. The laughter of the festival faded away, replaced by the haunting cries of the Sabine women. From the edges of the plaza, the Sabine men watched in shock and disbelief. At first, they thought it was part of the festivities, some strange game that had turned sinister. But as they realized the truth, anger surged within them. The camaraderie they had felt only moments ago turned into a boiling rage. They rushed forward, shouting for their women, desperate to reclaim what was theirs. "Stop! Release them," one of the Sabine men shouted, his voice raw with fury. He pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding with each step. His eyes locked onto the face of a Roman who held his sister tightly, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The sight of her helplessness ignited a fire within him, a fierce protectiveness that could not be ignored. As the Romans continued to pull the women away, chaos descended upon the plaza. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of celebration and desperation. The music that had once filled the air fell silent, replaced by the sound of struggle and protest. The cries of the Sabine women echoed through the streets, a haunting reminder of the reality unfolding before them. In the midst of the turmoil, Romulus stood firm, wrestling with his conscience. The very moment he had envisioned as a path to unity now felt like a betrayal. He could see the pain in the faces of the Sabine women, their eyes filled with disbelief and terror. Each scream pierced his heart, a stark reminder of the human cost of his ambition. Yet the tide could not be turned back. The Roman men, swept up in their fervor, moved swiftly, some trying to calm the women while others forcefully pulled them away from their families. The Sabine men fought fiercely, struggling against the Romans with everything they had. The plaza transformed into a battleground, with emotions running high and the stakes impossibly high. As the Romans made their way towards the outskirts of the plaza, dragging the Sabine women behind them, a feeling of dread settled over everyone. The festival, which had been filled with dreams and hopes, had turned into a nightmare. The women's faces reflected a mixture of shock and despair, their hearts breaking for the loved ones they had been torn from. Each woman felt as if a piece of her soul was being ripped away, leaving behind a hollow ache. One woman, her dark hair flowing wildly, fought against her captor, her voice rising above the chaos. "Please, don't do this. We are not yours to take." Her eyes blazed with defiance, refusing to accept the fate that awaited her. But her pleas fell on deaf ears, swallowed by the chaos that surrounded her. The Romans, driven by their desperation to secure their future, pressed on, each man feeling the weight of their actions. Some began to waver, caught in the crossfire of their desires and the reality of their actions. The cries of the Sabine women rang in their ears, a chorus of heartbreak that would haunt them forever. At last, the Romans reached the outskirts of the plaza, where they had prepared a temporary refuge for the women. It was there that they planned to keep the Sabine women safe, to protect them as they navigated this new and painful reality. But as the women were ushered into the makeshift camp, their expressions were filled with uncertainty and fear. In that moment, a profound silence enveloped the area, punctuated only by the sobs of the women and the heavy breathing of the men. The reality of what had just occurred weighed heavily on everyone. The Romans, who had once felt excitement and joy, now faced a heavy burden. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the consequences of their actions loomed large over them. The Sabine women, who had been celebrated guests only moments ago, were now captives in a city they did not know, surrounded by people who had taken everything from them. Their dreams of love and family were replaced by a stark and painful reality. And as night began to fall over Rome, the lights of the festival dimmed, casting long shadows over the plaza, a haunting reminder of the day when joy turned to heartbreak, and the longing for a better future ignited a fire of despair. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the Sabine village as news of the abduction spread like wildfire. The air crackled with tension and disbelief, emotions swirling like leaves caught in a gust of wind. The Sabine men, strong and resolute, gathered in the central square, their faces set with determination and rage. Their hearts ached for the women who had been taken from them, and in that moment, the very essence of their culture and identity felt threatened. At the forefront stood their leader, a man respected for his wisdom and bravery, whose face bore the marks of many battles. His heart was heavy, filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "We cannot allow this injustice to stand," he declared, his voice ringing out like a bell across the crowd. "Our women are not just our loved ones, they are the lifeblood of our tribe. We must unite and fight for them." The men nodded in agreement, their spirits ignited by the fire of their leader's words. They had always been a proud people, fiercely loyal to one another, and the abduction felt like a wound that cut deep into their very souls. This was not just about reclaiming their women, it was about honor, dignity, and the future of their families. Strategizing their next move was no easy task. The Romans had surprised them during the festival, exploiting their trust and the festive spirit that had brought their people together. The Sabine leader knew that a direct attack would be dangerous and could lead to more violence and suffering. Instead, he proposed a plan rooted in cunning and unity. "We will gather our allies," he instructed. "We are not alone in this fight. Other tribes have felt the sting of Roman ambition. If we join forces, we can reclaim our women and show the Romans that they cannot toy with us." Hope flickered in the hearts of the Sabines. They reached out to neighboring tribes, calling upon old friendships and alliances. Each messenger rode hard through the night, bearing news of the abduction and rallying the tribes to unite against a common enemy. As dawn broke, a coalition began to form, a tapestry of warriors ready to stand against the Romans. With each passing hour, the anger within the Sabine tribe grew, fueled by the images of their women, sisters, daughters, wives, being taken against their will. Mothers held their children close, whispering words of comfort while their own hearts bled for the women who had been taken. The loss felt like a shadow over their village, a haunting reminder of the vulnerability they faced. Every night, the Sabine men trained under the stars, their bodies moving in perfect unison, each strike and parry echoing their determination. They channeled their grief into strength, knowing that every ounce of pain they felt would fuel their fight. They crafted weapons and made plans, discussing strategies late into the night, their voices a low hum filled with urgency and resolve. As the day of reckoning approached, the emotional weight of the situation pressed heavily on the hearts of the Sabine people. They felt a deep connection to the women who had been taken. It wasn't just about reclaiming them physically, but about restoring the fabric of their community. The women represented their futures, the very essence of life that had been disrupted. The thought of their laughter, their nurturing presence, and their unyielding spirit being lost forever was unbearable. Finally, the day arrived when they would confront the Romans. As they marched toward the city, a collective heartbeat pulsed among the men, a rhythm of solidarity that filled them with courage. Their resolve was a tapestry woven from their love for their women, the honor of their tribe, and the fierce will to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. As they neared the Roman settlement, the sight of the walls ignited a fire within them. The leader raised his sword high, rallying the men for the battle that lay ahead. "We fight not just for our women, but for our way of life. For every moment stolen from us, we will take back. Let our love guide us, and let our hearts be as one. With a thunderous roar, they charged forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they approached the city, a feeling of uncertainty crept in. They had prepared for battle, yet in the back of their minds lingered the fear of what they might find. The thought of their women suffering, or worse, haunted them. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the memories of laughter that had turned to silence. Upon entering the Roman territory, the sight that met their eyes was both comforting and heartbreaking. The women, though captives, were not broken. They stood tall, their spirits shining through the fear, their hearts filled with love for their families. But even as the Sabines pressed on, the reality of the abduction weighed heavily on everyone involved. The emotional implications of this abduction ran deep within the Sabine culture. Women were revered as the heart of the home, and to take them was not merely to steal bodies, but to rob a community of its very soul. Each warrior felt this truth, an ache that resonated within them. The sound of the battle began to echo through the air, mingling with the cries of both Romans and Sabines. As the two groups clashed, the chaos intensified. Each blow, each cry, reverberated with the pain and anger of a people torn apart. The Sabines fought not just for victory, but for the love and unity of their families, their hearts echoing the hope of a reunion. And as the dust settled over the battlefield, amidst the cries of war, a singular thought pulsed in the minds of the Sabine men: they would not stop until every woman was returned to her rightful place, and until the bonds of their tribe were restored. The emotions ran high as the fight unfolded, each man driven by the love they held for those women and the determination to bring them home. In that moment, the Sabine men realized they were not just fighting against the Romans, they were battling for their own identity, their culture, and the future of their people. The stakes were monumental, and the outcome would determine the very fabric of their society. The battle raged on, fueled by a potent mix of love, loss, and the fierce desire to reclaim what was theirs. The cries of their women echoed in their hearts, driving them forward through the chaos of the battlefield. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty as the women of the Sabine tribe found themselves torn from their homes, their laughter silenced by the clamor of chaos. The vivid memories of their lives, the warm embrace of their mothers, the sweet moments shared with friends, and the gentle sounds of their village, faded like shadows at dusk. As they were pulled into the heart of the Roman settlement, a mixture of dread and disbelief washed over them. What awaited them in this strange land? Each woman had her own story, each filled with the threads of love, hope, and loss. They had been snatched from their lives during what was meant to be a joyous festival, a day of celebration that turned into a nightmare. Now, the echoes of laughter were replaced by the sounds of uncertainty, a reminder of the bond they had left behind. Some were barely old enough to be brides, while others had already become mothers, their hearts aching for the children they had been forced to leave behind. The Romans had their own customs and rules, and as the women arrived, they were thrust into a world that felt foreign and unforgiving. They looked around, taking in their surroundings, the imposing buildings, the strange faces, and the bustling crowds. Fear clutched at their hearts as they realized they were to become part of a society that had taken them against their will. Questions flooded their minds: would they ever see their families again? Would they be treated as human beings or merely as spoils of war? Yet, within the chaos, something remarkable began to unfold. The women, despite their circumstances, found a spark of resilience within themselves. They began to adapt to their new environment, navigating the complexities of Roman society with grace and strength. Some formed bonds with their captors, sharing stories and laughter, gradually breaking down the walls of hostility that had once divided them. It was a strange dance of survival, a blend of their own culture and the new life they were forced to embrace. In the beginning, each woman struggled with the memories of her home. They missed the warmth of their families, the familiar smells of their cooking, and the comfort of their own beds. At night, when the stars filled the sky, they would gather in small groups, whispering tales of their past to one another, finding solace in shared experiences. They would cry for their lost lives, yet they also spoke of hope, a hope that one day, they might find a way back to their loved ones. As time passed, their roles began to shift. The Sabine women were not merely passive victims, they were fierce and determined. They realized that they could bring their culture to life even in the heart of Rome. They introduced their cooking, their music, and their traditions to the households that had taken them in. In a sense, they became ambassadors of their tribe, weaving their rich history into the fabric of Roman society. Their strength was a quiet rebellion, a testament to the spirit that refused to be extinguished. The relationships they formed with Roman men were complex. For some, these bonds blossomed into love, an unexpected twist in the story of their abduction. They discovered kindness where they had only anticipated cruelty. These women were not just survivors, they were women of great depth, capable of forging connections that transcended the boundaries set by their circumstances. They became wives and mothers, nurturing the next generation with both Roman and Sabine values. In doing so, they created a new identity for themselves, blending their past with the present. However, this adaptation did not come without a price. Many of the women grappled with the weight of their decisions. How could they love those who had taken them from their families? Guilt and sorrow sometimes seeped into their hearts, haunting them during moments of quiet reflection. They found themselves torn between two worlds, their love for their new families and the grief for those they had lost. The emotional tug-of-war left them weary, yet they pressed on, driven by the desire to create a brighter future for their children. They learned to find strength in each other, forming a sisterhood that transcended their shared trauma. Together, they supported one another through the difficult days, and their collective spirit became a powerful force for resilience. They shared knowledge, teaching each other the ways of their respective cultures, and in doing so, they built a bridge of understanding. The bonds they forged became a source of hope, a reminder that they were not alone in their suffering. In Roman society, the women began to gain a voice, albeit quietly. They started to influence customs and traditions, infusing their own beliefs into the practices of their new homes. Their children grew up with a rich tapestry of history, learning to appreciate both the Roman and Sabine heritages. This melding of cultures became a beautiful testament to the power of love and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can adapt and thrive. As the years passed, many of the women found peace in their new lives. They became respected members of their households, valued not only for their beauty but for their wisdom and strength. Their experiences had shaped them into individuals with profound stories of survival, hope, and unexpected joy. They had not only survived their abduction, they had transformed their circumstances into something meaningful. Even as they flourished in their new roles, whispers of their past lingered in the corners of their hearts. The memories of their families remained, bittersweet but cherished. They would sometimes gaze at the horizon, dreaming of the homes they had left behind. But in their hearts, they carried the knowledge that love knows no boundaries, that it can bridge even the deepest divides. These women were more than just victims of a tale, they were survivors, architects of their own destinies. Their strength and resilience became the foundation for a new legacy, one that would echo through generations. They had learned to navigate the complexities of life with grace, turning their pain into purpose. In every laugh shared, every meal prepared, and every story told, they kept the spirit of their tribe alive, ensuring that their heritage would never be forgotten. In the end, the story of the Sabine women was not just one of abduction, it was a testament to the power of love, adaptation, and the unyielding human spirit. They were not defined by their abduction, but rather by their incredible journey of resilience, their ability to find beauty and strength even in the darkest of times. Their experiences shaped the very fabric of Roman society, leaving an indelible mark that would be remembered long after their own stories had faded into history. The earth trembled beneath the pounding of thousands of feet, a drumbeat of war echoing through the hills and valleys of ancient Italy. The Romans and the Sabines stood opposite one another, their eyes filled with fire and their hearts caught between vengeance and survival. There were no simple truths in this struggle, only a web of pain, love, and blood that had been spun since that fateful day of the abduction. The war was not a mere clash of armies, but a battle of wounded souls. The Sabine warriors, with fury etched into their faces, had the anguish of fathers, brothers, and lovers who had seen their daughters and sisters stolen away. They carried spears not just to fight but to honor their stolen kin, their grief driving every strike. On the Roman side, there was a fierce determination to protect what they had now woven into the fabric of their lives. The women who had been taken had become mothers, wives, and companions. They had rooted themselves into Roman society, and the Romans were prepared to defend this new life at any cost. The war raged with an intensity that shook even the heavens. The first skirmishes erupted like violent storms. Sabine warriors moved with a practiced ferocity, each swing of their sword driven by raw emotion. Their tactics were swift and brutal. They used the rugged terrain of their homeland to their advantage, ambushing Roman patrols in narrow valleys and launching surprise attacks from the forested hillsides. Every encounter left behind a haunting landscape of fallen men, of both Romans and Sabines, lying side by side, their eyes still wide with the shock of meeting death. The Romans, however, were not unprepared. Led by their king, Romulus, they fought with the calculated strength of a people who had built their city from the dust. Romulus, the very founder of Rome, was no stranger to hardship and struggle. He commanded his men with a voice that carried across the battlefield, urging them to defend not just their city but the families they had built. The Roman soldiers formed formidable defensive lines, shields locked together like iron walls, spears bristling toward the charging Sabines. It was a clash of bodies and steel, a grinding, relentless struggle for supremacy. As the war unfolded, both sides endured moments of terrible sacrifice. One of the fiercest battles occurred near the gates of Rome itself. The Sabines, driven by their burning desire to reclaim their women, launched a massive assault. The clash was brutal and relentless, each blow exchanged with the desperation of warriors fighting for the very essence of their lives. The Sabine general, Titus Tatius, fought at the front, his heart heavy with the cries of his people. He knew that every fallen Sabine warrior was a soul who had dreamed of saving a loved one. Yet, for every inch the Sabines gained, the Romans pushed back with equal resolve. In one heart-wrenching moment, a young Sabine warrior, barely old enough to carry the weight of his armor, faced a Roman veteran. The boy's eyes were filled with tears, and his sword trembled in his hands. Yet, he was there to defend the honor of his sister, taken during the festival. The Roman soldier, a man scarred and hardened, had a family of his own now, perhaps even one of the abducted women as his wife. Their swords met with a clash that echoed in the ears of every witness, a single moment embodying the pain of both tribes. It was not just a fight of two warriors, but a clash of histories and broken dreams. Despite the agony, there were instances of rare and poignant humanity. Between the battles, there were moments when warriors from both sides locked eyes and saw something familiar, perhaps a shared understanding of loss. They were all victims of a conflict that had spiraled out of human desperation. There were whispered stories of Roman and Sabine soldiers sparing each other in the heat of battle, a flash of compassion breaking through the haze of rage. It was as if, for a brief second, they remembered that they were not just enemies but human beings caught in a tragedy. But the war was not without strategy. The Sabines, led by Titus Tatius, tried to break Rome's spirit by laying siege to the city. They cut off supply lines, hoping to starve the Romans into submission. Tension hung heavy over the city walls, and hunger gnawed at the Roman people. Yet, Romulus and his warriors held strong. They fortified their defenses, watching the Sabine army with eyes that betrayed not a flicker of weakness. It was a grim, grueling test of endurance. One of the most cunning maneuvers in the conflict occurred when the Sabines attempted to infiltrate Rome by a hidden path. A Sabine warrior, well acquainted with the terrain, led a group of soldiers in the dead of night, hoping to take the city by surprise. But Roman scouts spotted the movement, and the alarm was raised. The ensuing fight under the cover of darkness was a desperate, chaotic affair. Shadows became enemies, and the moon witnessed a massacre painted in the hues of blood and moonlight. The Romans narrowly defended their city, but the fear of how close they had come to defeat lingered. The cost of every skirmish was felt deeply. Both tribes mourned their dead in ways that reflected their grief and culture. The Romans lit funeral pyres, their flames reaching high into the night, while the Sabines sang songs of mourning, their voices heavy with loss. The air grew thick with grief as the cries of mourning mothers and widows pierced the silence left after every battle. It was a war without true victors, a conflict that bled both sides dry. Yet, amid the endless bloodshed, the women who had been at the heart of it all, the Sabine women, torn between their past and their present, became a silent force of hope and strength. They had watched as fathers fought sons-in-law, as brothers clashed with the husbands they had grown to love. It was a war fueled by the bonds that had been shattered and reforged in the strangest of ways. And so, their silent prayers for peace hung heavy in the air, a yearning for the madness to end, for the broken pieces of their world to find some semblance of healing. The battlefield was a place where the air itself felt heavy with sorrow, a land soaked with blood and tears. The cries of pain from both Romans and Sabines had become a familiar sound, echoing through the valleys. Each side fought with a deep, consuming fire, but the greatest suffering was felt not by the warriors, but by the women who had lived in the shadows of this tragedy. These women, the Sabine wives of Roman men and the daughters of Sabine warriors, found themselves caught in an unimaginable storm. Their hearts were torn in two, split between their fathers and brothers on one side and their husbands and children on the other. Every clash of swords was like a dagger to their souls, each scream a reminder of the impossible reality they lived. There were daughters and wives, mothers and sisters, each one burdened by a love so tangled and painful that it became almost too heavy to bear. One afternoon, as the sun glared harshly upon yet another battlefield, something extraordinary began to happen. Women, dressed in simple garments that bore the stains of both household labor and sleepless, tear-filled nights, began to move forward. Their hands were empty, no weapons to be found, but in their eyes burned a determination that no blade could shatter. They had no armor, no shields, only the raw, desperate power of mothers and wives who had had enough. The war was not only tearing their families apart, but shredding the very fabric of their existence. The fighting paused as confusion rippled through the ranks. Men from both sides hesitated, their swords momentarily lowered, as they saw the women coming. These warriors, hardened by months of battle, felt something crack within them as they watched the figures of their mothers, wives, and sisters walking toward the center of the battlefield. Tears streaked the faces of some, their fierce resolve softened by the sight of those they fought to defend. The women's voices rose, not in anger or reproach, but in a symphony of grief and longing. Their pleas for peace echoed over the fields, carried on the wind like a prayer. They spoke not with eloquence or practiced words, but with a raw honesty that cut deeper than any weapon. Their cries begged for mercy, for an end to the madness that had driven father to fight against son, and brother to strike against brother-in-law. Each word was drenched in the truth of their shattered dreams, the memories of a life that had once held promise and joy. A young woman named Hercilia, whose story had become almost legendary among both Romans and Sabines, led them. Hercilia's heartache was beyond words. Married to a Roman, she had also watched her Sabine family suffer the violence. Yet her courage was undeniable. She stood between the two armies, her arms outstretched, as though she could physically hold back the rage that had consumed the land. Her voice trembled with emotion as she called out to her husband and her father, her words reaching into the hearts of every man present. "Are we not all family now?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Have we not shared the same blood, the same dreams? Will we tear our sons from their fathers, our daughters from their mothers, all in the name of this endless hatred?" Her words pierced through the chaos, and silence fell over the battlefield. Warriors who had been seconds away from delivering fatal blows lowered their weapons. Some knelt in the dirt, overwhelmed by the weight of their own grief and shame. The faces of the men, once set in lines of fury, softened as they listened to the pleas of the women they loved. For the first time, they felt the terrible consequences of their choices, the empty cradles, the widowed mothers, the families torn asunder. The women moved among the warriors, touching the hands of their loved ones, looking into the eyes of men they had feared would never return home. Tears spilled freely, and hands that had once wielded weapons now trembled with regret. These women were more than victims, they had become the last hope for a broken world. Their courage lay not in physical strength, but in the boundless capacity of their hearts. They refused to accept that this violence was the only way forward. The sheer emotional force of that moment was overwhelming. The men, who had fought with such fervor, now found their anger melting into sorrow. There was no enemy worth the price of a mother's grief, no victory worth the anguish of a child who would never know his father's love. The battlefield, once a place of death and destruction, became a stage for an extraordinary act of human compassion and resilience. Hersilia and the other women did not just beg for peace, they demanded it, with every ounce of pain and love they had left. Their actions were not born of weakness but of a profound, unwavering strength. They were the heart of this story, the peacemakers who saw through the hate and held onto a vision of unity, even when it seemed like the most foolish dream. This moment carried a power so raw, so full of truth, that it transformed the men who witnessed it. Even the most battle-hardened warriors felt their souls stir. They realized that the women were right, their rage had blinded them to what truly mattered. And so, swords were slowly laid down, shields lowered. Fathers embraced sons, brothers looked at each other not with the eyes of enemies, but of family. The cries of the women had brought a light to a darkness that had seemed unending. That day, on a battlefield once drenched with sorrow, love and hope made their stand. It was not a happy ending, not yet, but it was a beginning. The women, the mothers and daughters who had known the deepest grief, had become the unlikeliest of heroes. In their hands, they held no weapons, only the power of a love fierce enough to stop a war. Their voices became a symbol of healing, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could start to mend when courage and compassion stood in the way of hate. The story of ancient Rome's origins has always carried a sense of magic, wrapped in a mist of legends passed down from generation to generation. Who hasn't felt their heartbeat quicken hearing about Romulus and Remus, twin brothers born of a god and raised by a she-wolf, only to build a city that would change the world? It's a tale that drips with destiny, bravery, and betrayal, one where mythology and history twine so tightly it's hard to pull them apart without feeling like you're losing something precious. Yet, as wondrous and heart-stirring as these stories are, a deeper and more complex truth lies beneath. Real people lived through the harsh realities of early Rome, and historians have dedicated lifetimes trying to untangle myth from what could have actually happened. Standing between these two worlds, the dreamlike narratives of gods and heroes, and the often brutal reality of ancient survival, feels a bit like gazing at a foggy mountain. You can see outlines, glimpses of what's real, but the mist keeps you guessing. The myths surrounding Rome's founding are the backbone of its cultural identity, starting with the image of Romulus and Remus. Abandoned as infants, left to the mercy of nature, they were found and nurtured by a she-wolf, her fierce protection and wild love giving them the strength to grow into warriors. This vision is unforgettable, the wolf mother, her eyes glistening with a mix of ferocity and tenderness, and the two helpless infants who would one day carve a civilization from the land around them. How could anyone want to let go of such a haunting image? And yet, when historians dig deeper, there's that quiet, nagging question: did this really happen? Sources conflict, sometimes clashing with the mythical accounts. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Rome wasn't as glorious as the legends make it seem. The first settlements were likely simple and unadorned, homes made of mud and straw, where survival was a constant struggle. Instead of gods intervening in the affairs of men, it was more likely that harsh winters and scarce resources ruled their lives. The raw truth of history often carries more hunger and hardship than heroism. But even as scholars sift through the facts, the myths refuse to fade away. They persist, stubborn and shimmering, because they serve a purpose that numbers and timelines can't. Myths offer us a glimpse into the values, fears, and hopes of ancient people. They reveal what early Romans needed to believe about themselves to keep going in a world that offered little mercy. If you listen closely to these tales, you hear not just the roar of gods or the clash of weapons, but the tremble of human voices trying to make sense of a life filled with uncertainty. Take, for instance, the story of Romulus killing his brother Remus. It's a moment both savage and deeply symbolic, one that strikes a nerve in anyone who has ever loved fiercely but fought with equal passion. It's a story of betrayal, but also of ambition so fierce it destroys the very bonds that once brought comfort and safety. Historians ponder whether this brutal tale was based on a real event or if it was crafted to explain why Rome often felt divided, like a city constantly wrestling with its own dual nature. The myth isn't just a story, it's a mirror to a society that knew conflict all too well. The tension between historical accuracy and mythology creates a kind of ache, a longing for clarity that may never come. Take the example of Livy, the Roman historian who chronicled the early history of Rome. He wrote with an undeniable love for his city, but he also knew he was walking a fine line between fact and fiction. His accounts brim with patriotism, but he sometimes admits that the tales he shares may not be entirely true. Reading Livy is like hearing a grandfather tell stories of his youth. Even if not every word is factual, the emotion behind them feels real. You sense the beating heart of Rome through his words, even if the details are hazy. Yet, there's beauty in this uncertainty. Myths have a way of carrying meaning that transcends time, offering comfort or inspiration in ways that cold facts sometimes can't. Imagine the early Romans, huddled around fires on a bitterly cold night, listening to tales of their city's divine origins. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were a source of strength. They reminded the people of Rome that they were part of something bigger than themselves, a destiny forged by the gods and bound in blood and struggle. Even the most skeptical historian can't completely shake off the power of these stories. It's human nature to be drawn to legends, to want to believe that our ancestors were extraordinary. And who could blame us? The gods, the wolves, the warriors, they make our past feel alive, crackling with energy and mystery. But there's also a quiet heroism in the lives of the real people who lived and died in early Rome. The farmers, builders, and mothers who never became legends but whose grit and determination formed the foundations of a city that would one day rule the known world. The challenge lies in learning to love both sides of this coin, the myths that spark our imagination and the history that grounds us in reality. It's like looking at a mosaic. Up close, you can see each tiny piece, each fragment of stone or glass. Some are beautiful, glittering in the sunlight, while others are dull and rough. But when you take a step back, you see how all those pieces come together to tell a larger story. That story is messy and incomplete, but it's also breathtaking. The myths are a reminder of who people wanted to be, the history a record of who they actually were. And in that space between truth and tale, there's a kind of magic that makes the past feel both distant and heartbreakingly close. As we stand, reading the words left behind, we feel the ghostly echo of hopes, fears, and dreams that still feel hauntingly familiar. The night of the festival, when the Sabine women were taken from their families, left an indelible mark on the history of Rome. It was a moment that tore through the lives of so many and embedded itself in the collective soul of a city that was still shaping its identity. This act of abduction was more than just a desperate move by a fledgling community. It revealed the harsh values and social norms of a world where human needs and raw power collided in brutal ways. To understand the impact of that day is to peer into the heart of ancient society, where strength, survival, and honor were worshipped like deities. Yet the tender humanity of individuals often got lost in the chaos. The Sabine women, who had grown up in tribes where family ties were sacred, were pulled from the safety of their homes into a terrifying new existence. Their screams must have echoed in the night, carrying the heartbreak of separation, of futures ripped away. Young women, daughters, sisters, some even brides-to-be, found themselves forced into the role of wives to men they had never met. The trauma of being taken, of knowing that their fathers and brothers had been deceived in a moment meant to celebrate life, is almost too painful to imagine. And yet, Rome justified the act with the cold logic of necessity. The early Romans needed women to ensure their city's survival. It wasn't just about growing families, it was about crafting a future, building alliances through forced bonds, and cementing a people's claim to the land they occupied. But what does it say about a society when it uses human beings as tools, bending their wills for the sake of an ideal? The abduction of the Sabine women lays bare the stark truth: Rome was willing to break hearts and spirits for the promise of greatness. In the twisted way of ancient societies, this event also shone a light on how women were perceived. Women were seen as essential for stability, not just as childbearers, but as peacekeepers, cultural bridges, and caretakers of lineage. Yet, at the same time, they were vulnerable to being treated as pawns. It was a paradox woven into the fabric of the time. These women, cherished in the homes they came from, became symbols in the conflict between the Sabines and Romans. The abduction highlighted how women's lives were inextricably tied to the ambitions and decisions of men, and the impact was as much emotional as it was societal. The forced marriages that followed were filled with tension and complexity. For the Sabine women, the transition from beloved daughters to reluctant wives was a painful one. Some likely resisted fiercely, their grief so raw it must have been palpable, a force that no amount of Roman strength could easily tame. Others, perhaps driven by the need to survive or protect future children from the dangers of a divided home, adapted in ways that only they could understand. It was a society where survival often came at the cost of dreams, and love, if it ever grew in those marriages, was born from the ashes of shattered hope. Rome's treatment of these women also revealed its expectations for them. The Sabine women were suddenly expected to embrace new roles in Roman society, roles that demanded loyalty to their new families and, eventually, to the city itself. The cultural message was clear: a woman's identity was malleable, shaped by the men who controlled her fate. This was a world where a woman's worth was often determined by the alliances she could foster and the children she could bear. Yet, there is an undeniable strength in these women's stories. Despite being caught in the web of power struggles and cultural expectations, the Sabine women eventually found ways to influence the world around them. Forced to reconcile the love they once had for their birth families with the duty they now had to their husbands and children, they embodied the painful tension between the old and the new. There were bridges between two worlds, and in the end, it was their courage and willingness to confront an impossible situation that brought an end to the violence. The cultural implications of the abduction left a lasting imprint on Roman society. It shaped the way women were viewed, both as vital for the survival of a community but also as individuals whose feelings and autonomy could be sacrificed for a greater good. It set a precedent for how the role of women would be seen in the years to come, pillars of family life, respected for their ability to sustain the lineage and keep the peace, yet often denied true agency over their own lives. In reflecting on this brutal chapter, one cannot help but feel a mixture of awe and sorrow for those women. They lived in a world that often asked them to be both strong and silent, to bear unimaginable burdens without complaint. Their experiences tell a story of survival, of love found in unlikely places, of sacrifice and the complex ways in which people learn to live alongside the unthinkable. In their suffering, they revealed the humanity that lay at the heart of Rome's mythic origins, a city that would grow mighty, but never without cost, never without pain that ran as deep as the Tiber River itself. The sound of Roman law echoed not just in courtrooms or council chambers, but in the lives and hearts of countless women. It was a force both invisible and ironbound, deciding who women could be, who they could love, and what they could hope for. In ancient Rome, a woman's life was woven into the tight weave of customs and legal codes. And yet, behind the facade of order and strength, there were stories of resilience, of how women, even in the face of unforgiving laws, found ways to influence their world. Centuries ago, the rules governing women were rooted in the belief that women needed the guidance and control of men. It wasn't a matter of love or respect, it was about possession, about ensuring that the lineage of Roman families stayed intact and unquestioned. Women were expected to be faithful, dutiful, and obedient, existing under the watchful eyes of fathers, then husbands. But beneath this harsh reality lay the spirit of countless women who yearned for a voice, who carried dreams that the law ignored. Marriage, one of the pillars of Roman life, was as much a transaction as it was a partnership. Women did not get to choose, they were given, handed from one male guardian to another. Marriage was a contract that sealed alliances, a bond often forged between families, not lovers. Yet, within the confines of such unions, women had to find their strength. They ran households, managed estates, and raised children, all while knowing that their status was one of constant dependence. And it is impossible to discuss Roman law and the treatment of women without thinking about the Sabine women. Their story is a tale of pain, of being forcefully separated from their families and thrust into marriages they never wanted. But it doesn't end there. These women, caught between two warring worlds, became symbols of something far greater than their suffering. They managed to redefine what strength looked like, even if their power was silent, hidden behind the veil of everyday life. The abduction and eventual settlement of the Sabine women into Roman society had repercussions that rippled through generations. The Romans, in their desperation, had violated what was sacred, but the Sabine women, instead of being destroyed by this trauma, used it to carve out new norms. By the force of their presence, they began to challenge the roles they were assigned, demanding a say in their own futures, even in subtle ways. It was a shift that no law could ignore forever. Laws about marriage slowly began to evolve, shaped by a society that was growing and changing, one that had to recognize the humanity of the very women who gave it life. It was not that the Romans suddenly became benevolent or fair, but there was an understanding that stability relied on respecting the foundations of family. The Sabine women's act of peacemaking, stepping between fathers and husbands to end bloodshed, showed a society where women's voices could not be dismissed as mere whispers. It was a moment that forced Rome to see the importance of unity and compassion, even if the laws took time to catch up. Over time, Roman law began to reflect this uneasy balance. The strict rules softened in some ways, allowing women more protections within their marriages. Laws were introduced to limit abuses, and while women were still far from equals, there were cracks forming in the walls of male authority. The very presence of these women, their struggle for acceptance and respect, had left an imprint that no one could erase. A woman's right to property, her role as a mother, her responsibilities in a household, all of these were affected by the slow, painful progress inspired in part by the courage of the Sabine women. These women, who were never given a choice, somehow managed to force a shift in a society that needed them. Their dignity, their survival, became a quiet rebellion against the idea that women were merely possessions. But it would be misleading to say that Roman women suddenly became free. The law still favored men, placing them at the center of all power. Fathers had the right to control the lives of their daughters, husbands could dictate the fate of their wives. Yet, even so, a transformation had begun. The courage of women who had faced abduction and emerged not just as victims but as essential members of their new community sparked a small, crucial flame of change. There was something haunting about the way Roman law bound women, but it could not silence their souls. They found ways to navigate the restrictions, to protect their children and honor their own dreams. Some women, like the daughters of great patrician families, used their status to influence political decisions subtly, while others, the everyday mothers and daughters, held families together with an unbreakable strength. The treatment of women under Roman law was a reflection of a society constantly at war with itself, holding on to traditions while being forced to grow. It was a society where women, even when denied a voice, still managed to make themselves heard. The story of the Sabine women is a testament to this, a tale of sorrow that evolved into a legacy of quiet power. Their impact changed the very city that had once treated them as spoils of war, and though Roman law remained strict and often merciless, it had to bend, if only a little, to the spirit of the women who refused to be broken. These laws, these restrictions, could never fully contain the force of a mother's love, the wisdom of a wife, or the will of a daughter who wanted something more. The Sabine women, in all their heartbreak and resilience, carved out a space for women in a world that tried to silence them. Their story is not just one of laws and governance, but of hearts that beat with courage, shaping a society that had to learn, piece by piece, what it meant to truly honor the strength of women. The air in ancient Rome, thick with the weight of tradition, often left little room for hope if you were born a woman. Rules governed every part of a woman's existence. Fathers decided whom their daughters would marry, husbands controlled their wives, and the law backed these men with an authority that left no space for questioning. Women existed as shadows in a world crafted by men, where love and choice were luxuries they rarely experienced. The law declared them vessels of lineage, guardians of family honor, and little more. Yet, even in a world where male dominance seemed unbreakable, women found ways to shape society, slowly, painfully, with every silent sacrifice. The Sabine women, a chapter carved out of agony, made their mark in ways no lawmaker had anticipated. Their story wasn't just a tale of forced marriages or stolen youth, it was about how courage, even when born out of trauma, could turn the course of history. Abducted, stripped of the lives they had known, and forced to make new homes among strangers, these women were given no time to grieve. But instead of succumbing to despair, they wielded a power that came from the deepest wellsprings of the human heart. In the midst of their sorrow, the Sabine women became pillars of the society they were thrust into. These were not women who accepted their fate without struggle. Every day was a quiet act of defiance. They found ways to command respect, to influence their new families, to demand better futures for their children. Their resilience became the seeds of change. Even the might of Roman law had to bend, if only a little, under the force of their silent, undeniable presence. Marriage laws in Rome, before and long after the abduction of the Sabine women, were painfully rigid. A woman was a tool for alliance, a means of transferring property or political favor. Her worth lay in her ability to produce sons and preserve family honor. Yet, the role these women played in society grew more complex as they refused to be merely the possessions of their husbands. The Sabine women proved that even under the harshest circumstances, women were more than passive participants in history. They loved fiercely, advocated for peace, and safeguarded their families. One of the most heart-wrenching moments in Roman history comes from the image of these women, standing between the men they loved and the men who had once been their fathers and brothers. Swords clashed, and blood stained the ground, but these women, with tears streaming down their faces, demanded an end to the violence. They had lost enough. In that fragile, impossible moment, the course of Roman society shifted. Their grief became a force that not even the most battle-hardened men could ignore. In that act, the Sabine women redefined what it meant to be powerful. It wasn't about the strength of your sword, but the depth of your compassion. Roman law was slow to change, but it had to evolve in a world where women like the Sabines made their mark. Marriage itself began to transform. No longer could it be purely a transaction, there had to be space, however small, for the needs and desires of women. The role of a Roman matron gained new dignity. Laws were eventually established to protect wives from the worst abuses, acknowledging that these women were more than extensions of their husbands. The influence of mothers, the love of daughters, and the loyalty of wives became recognized as foundations of a strong society. For all the harshness of ancient Roman life, the unbreakable spirit of its women is a reminder of how change often begins in the quietest ways. Laws reflected the struggles and sacrifices of women like the Sabines. They forced the powerful to consider, even reluctantly, the voices of the supposedly powerless. Over time, this created cracks in the foundation of male dominance, allowing light to shine through. Small victories, like the right to own property or to have a say in the upbringing of their children, were steps forward. These changes were hard-won, carved out of lives that never stopped yearning for something better. One can almost feel the weight of these laws pressing down on the Roman women who came after the Sabines. But in each mother's love, each wife's wisdom, and each daughter's dream, the echo of those early struggles remained. The law was still unkind, but it was no longer as unbreakable. The Sabine women's story was proof that even the most powerless could bring about change. They had turned horror into hope, captivity into connection, and pain into progress. These women didn't rewrite laws with parchment and ink, they changed hearts, which in turn began to influence lawmakers. Their role in society grew, as did the understanding of their worth. A Sabine woman's love could end a war. Her courage could keep a family strong. Her strength could inspire laws that protected the generations to come. And though Rome would never become a land of perfect equality, it carried the imprints of every silent struggle, every tear shed in the name of something greater. The Sabine women remind us that even when history tries to silence certain voices, those voices find ways to endure. Their legacy, carved out in moments of heartbreak and bravery, left a mark on Roman law that can never be erased. What they fought for, often without weapons or legal rights, was a future where women could dream, even in a world that seemed to deny them the right. It was their strength, their unyielding will to create love and peace out of the deepest wounds, that changed what Roman law could and couldn't ignore. The canvas comes alive with chaos, tension, and the haunting beauty of human emotions trapped in one of the most unsettling tales of ancient history. Centuries may have passed, but the rape of the Sabine women remains a narrative so powerful that artists and writers, from Renaissance masters to modern storytellers, felt compelled to capture the soul-crushing drama and poignant tragedy of that fateful event. In every brushstroke and every haunting verse, one feels the terror of the women, the desperation of their fathers, and the fierce determination of the men who committed acts that would shape the destiny of Rome itself. In the heart of Renaissance Europe, artists like Nicolas Poussin and Giambologna immortalized the event in their masterpieces. Imagine walking through a hushed gallery and standing before Poussin's depiction, a swirl of limbs, the anguish on the faces of the Sabine women palpable, almost reaching out to you. The scene seizes your breath, and you can't look away. These women, captured in the agony of that terrible moment, seem so real you can feel their pain. Their struggle and vulnerability make your chest tighten, as the chaotic motion of the painting pulls you into the heart of their suffering. The men, faces full of determination or guilt, clash and move like a storm, while the women become islands of raw humanity, caught between terror and the desire to protect their loved ones. Giambologna's sculpture, in smooth marble that almost seems to breathe, turns anguish into something eternal. The abduction scene he carved captures the Sabine woman's body twisting away, every muscle tense, her arm outstretched as if trying to grasp something she will never hold again. It's a story frozen in time, a moment where innocence is shattered and the struggle for freedom remains unending. You want to look away, to unsee the distress that emanates from the sculpture, but it grips you, reminding you of the unbearable power of vulnerability. This story wasn't just captured in paintings and sculptures. Writers, too, poured their hearts into the tale, painting with words what artists did with pigment and stone. Shakespeare wove references to the Sabine women into his plays, and their fate was whispered into the pages of literature throughout the ages. Playwrights took to the stage, recreating the festival that turned into an abduction, the heartbreak that spiraled into a historical legend. They explored the complexity of this human tragedy, the men who took what wasn't theirs, the women forced to find strength amid their shattered dreams, and the generations shaped by an event that became a scar on the very fabric of history. The story found its way into theaters, where actors portrayed the raw emotions of that day. The Festival of Neptune, once a celebration full of hope and joy, turned into a haunting stage set for betrayal. The audience could feel the weight of what was lost, each cry from the stage cutting deeper than the last. The playwrights used the story to speak about more than a historical event. It became a way to question power, to mourn for those without a voice, and to remind everyone of the cost of unchecked ambition. Visual arts, literature, and theater didn't just recreate the abduction, they examined the aftermath. The inner worlds of the Sabine women became a focal point, their resilience both heartbreaking and inspiring. As years turned to centuries, the women in this story were portrayed as warriors of peace, mothers and lovers who, despite everything taken from them, found ways to nurture a future out of devastation. Their silent strength transformed art into an emotional battlefield, where compassion became a force more enduring than any conquest. The event's emotional gravity inspired countless interpretations. Romantic poets painted word pictures of the stolen moments, the loss of innocence mingling with unbreakable hope. These depictions made readers grieve with the Sabine women, feel the weight of the decisions that pulled their hearts in every direction, and understand the magnitude of a love that could forgive, heal, and demand change. Artists in the 19th and 20th centuries revisited the tale, infusing it with modern anguish and commentary, suggesting that the echoes of such suffering resonate beyond history, that the struggles of those women are in some way timeless. One can't help but notice how this story pushed creators to express something more than horror. It became a canvas on which human frailty, strength, and complexity could be explored. Even in contemporary settings, artists and filmmakers have reimagined the Sabine women's narrative, looking for relevance in a world still grappling with questions of power, consent, and the resilience of the human spirit. Their legacy, through art and literature, continues to challenge and haunt us, reminding us that some tales, no matter how ancient, still have the power to make our hearts ache and our spirits reflect. It is a story that won't be silenced. Art ensures that the cries of the Sabine women echo through time, that their strength and sorrow remain etched into the collective consciousness. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of these interpretations, the ability to make us feel, to make us uncomfortable, to force us to remember a past that is far too close to our present. Each piece, whether painted, written, or performed, carries a piece of their pain, a fragment of their fight, and a hope that we will always remember what they endured and how, even in their darkest hours, they became unwilling yet unforgettable icons of human resilience. The story of the Sabine women is more than just an ancient tale, it's a heartbeat, echoing across generations, carrying with it whispers of pain, resilience, and the unfathomable strength of the human spirit. For centuries, it has been remembered and retold, etched into the culture and memory of Rome, resonating in ways that still send shivers down the spine of anyone who truly hears it. In that early, chaotic era of Rome, when walls were still raw and dreams were barely formed, the city faced a challenge that would carve its destiny. The abduction of the Sabine women, an event shrouded in raw human emotion, isn't easily forgotten. But it is the aftermath, the legacy they left behind, that transformed their suffering into something profoundly powerful. The memory of these women became a symbol. The courage they found within themselves to rise above what had been done to them, to stand as the invisible yet unbreakable pillars of a society that had wronged them, captured the imagination of all who came after. They were more than victims of a brutal moment. They became mothers of a united people, carriers of hope, and champions of an uneasy but necessary peace. Their story left a deep imprint on Roman culture, shaping not only the way women were perceived, but also how strength was defined. Generations grew up with tales of their quiet defiance. Children, gathered around firelight, listened as elders recounted how these women, torn from their families and homes, had the strength to forge new bonds with their captors, not through acceptance, but through an understanding of what needed to be done to save lives. In the retelling, the Sabine women became legends of compassion that could break the cycle of violence, figures who understood that healing wasn't a betrayal of the past, but a gift to the future. It's impossible not to feel goosebumps at the thought of their impact on society. The values they brought to Rome, the power of reconciliation, the endurance in the face of suffering, and the belief that even after unimaginable loss, love and unity could bloom, shaped cultural norms and expectations. Their actions, retold through the centuries, taught the Romans that strength wasn't always about conquest or brute force, but could also lie in the act of bringing peace. As Rome grew and transformed, the story of the Sabine women endured, serving as a reminder during times of both triumph and turmoil. Even as new emperors rose and fell, as the city expanded beyond its wildest dreams, the narrative remained a cornerstone of Roman heritage. Monuments and statues were erected to honor not just gods and generals, but also the women who, through sheer will, transformed a moment of darkness into a lesson of unparalleled significance. Poets and storytellers wove the tale into the cultural fabric of Rome. They spoke of the women with reverence, as figures who proved that the deepest wounds could give rise to profound wisdom. The story wasn't confined to dusty scrolls or whispered legends, it lived and breathed in the daily lives of the people. It was a source of pride, a painful but necessary chapter that spoke of who the Romans were and who they aspired to be. The impact of the Sabine women wasn't limited to Rome. Their legacy rippled across cultures, inspiring artists and thinkers far beyond the city's borders. Across the Mediterranean and into Europe, their story was adapted, retold, and transformed into lessons of moral and social significance. In these retellings, the essence of what the Sabine women represented, courage, resilience, and the pursuit of peace, was never lost. Even in modern times, their story continues to haunt and inspire. Historians, writers, and artists look back at these women, grappling with the layers of complexity that their legacy holds. They were unwilling participants in history's cruel game, yet they emerged as key figures in the formation of one of the world's most influential civilizations. Their legacy serves as a reminder of the countless, often overlooked ways in which women shape the course of human history, not through grand battles, but through the choices they make when faced with impossible situations. What resonates most is the humanity of their story. It's easy to get lost in the grandeur of Rome, in the tales of great warriors and emperors, but the Sabine women ground us in the reality that even empires are built on the backs of those who endure and find ways to move forward despite the odds. Their legacy is woven into the soul of a civilization that would go on to define much of the Western world, a civilization that learned, however imperfectly, that peace often requires the courage to forgive and the strength to hold on to love. Their impact is still felt, a testament to the enduring power of resilience and the profound ways trauma can reshape societies. As one reflects on their legacy, it is impossible not to feel a surge of emotion, a deep respect for these women who, through no choice of their own, changed the course of history and left behind a lesson that will forever linger in the hearts of all who hear it. In the dim corners of ancient societies, where power and struggle danced together, where legacies were born and stories were carved onto walls of stone, one aspect remained woven into the daily existence of every soul: the roles given to men and women. The way these roles evolved, the way they determined life's rhythm, whispers something extraordinary about humanity, its flaws, its hopes, and its unending drive to define itself. Ancient Rome stands as one of history's most studied empires, and in its heart lay a set of rules, silent yet heavy, governing what it meant to be a man or a woman. Roman women, though often hidden behind the shadows of their fathers and husbands, played crucial roles that shaped the society. They lived under the expectation of being loyal, obedient, and capable bearers of the next generation of Romans. Every day, they moved through spaces carved out for them by tradition and necessity, spaces that could be both beautiful and suffocating, nurturing and confining. Despite this, they found ways to wield their influence. A Roman matron, with her grace and wisdom, held the home together and often pulled the strings behind important family decisions. Women from noble families could be patrons of the arts, host gatherings where politics were discussed, and even inspire laws and policies through the quiet but fierce power they carried. Still, even in the most privileged positions, they were shackled by laws that prevented them from holding public office or owning property without a male guardian. It was a life of indirect strength, a strength that was undeniable but often unacknowledged. But Rome wasn't the only society caught in the struggle of defining gender roles. Across the world in Greece, women experienced a different, yet equally complex reality. In Athens, they were secluded, kept from public life, and considered second to their male counterparts in almost every way. Yet in Sparta, just a short distance away, women were raised to be strong, educated, and outspoken. Spartan women could own property, run estates, and were fiercely proud of their independence. They were expected to be mothers to warriors, yes, but their position held a unique respect that Athenian women could scarcely dream of. Turn your gaze to the far reaches of the world and another tapestry unfolds. In Egypt, ancient women held rights that seemed far ahead of their time. They could own land, manage businesses, and, in some cases, even become pharaohs. The great Queen Hatshepsut and the mysterious Cleopatra are testaments to how Egyptian culture, in its ebb and flow, allowed women moments of incredible power. Unlike in Rome or Greece, where laws strictly limited women's influence, the Nile's rhythm seemed to have given them a stronger voice, a more tangible place in society. The Celts of Western Europe painted yet another portrait of gender. Celtic women, bold and fierce, could fight in battles, inherit land, and sometimes lead tribes. Stories of warrior queens like Boudica echo through time, tales of defiance and leadership that defy the typical ancient narrative. For these women, strength wasn't confined to the domestic sphere but extended to war and governance. They inspired fear and respect, rewriting the limits of what was considered possible for women in their era. Yet, in contrast, many societies across the world, particularly those steeped in agrarian traditions, maintained stricter divisions. In China, for instance, Confucian teachings emphasized a strict patriarchy. Women were bound to obey the men in their families and were expected to live lives defined by duty and virtue. Yet even there, remarkable figures like Empress Wu Zetian emerged, shattering expectations and carving their names into history with unmatched force. The evolution of gender roles over time in ancient societies speaks volumes about the fluidity of human cultures. It shows how traditions could be both stubborn and adaptable, how women could be celebrated or stifled, depending on the shifting tides of power and belief. Even in Rome, these roles weren't static. During the early Republic, women's influence was tightly controlled, yet as the empire expanded, necessity and change granted them more visibility. Some were gladiators, defying expectations in the arena. Others, like the mother of the Gracchi brothers, became legends for their impact on their sons and, consequently, Roman politics. The pressure of war, of expanding empires and shifting alliances, often dictated these roles. When men left for battle, women stepped into roles they never would have otherwise. They managed estates, ran businesses, and kept society functioning. The gender dynamics of these ancient times were, in a way, a testament to the strength that adversity called forth. And as societies evolved, so did the perception of what it meant to be a woman or a man. In Rome's later years, the voices of women, still muffled, found ways to influence culture. The Stoic philosophers, whose teachings permeated Roman thought, sometimes argued for the betterment of women's education. Though far from modern equality, the seeds of change were being planted. Through all this, there's a haunting realization: the limitations placed on women didn't always reflect their abilities. Their strength, their wisdom, their capacity for leadership and endurance shone through, even when laws and customs tried to keep them small. The stories of these women, whether Roman matrons, Spartan warriors, Egyptian rulers, or Celtic queens, whisper the truth of human resilience. They remind us that power isn't always about the battles fought or the laws passed. Sometimes, it's about surviving, about leaving a mark that can't be erased, about rising above what the world tried to make you believe you were worth. Gender dynamics in ancient societies are tales of resistance and adaptation, a delicate, often painful dance between what was expected and what could be. And in every society, from the heart of Rome to the furthest reaches of the world, women carved their places in history, not with a desire for glory but with the simple need to live fully, to love fiercely, and to claim whatever spaces they could in a world that often tried to deny them. Their stories linger, not as distant echoes, but as powerful reminders of all that they carried, of all that they were, and of all that they refused to let the world take away from them. Blood and tears have often written the stories of nations, and Rome's early years were no different. It was a time when power was carved out with sharpened edges, where lives changed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. At the heart of Rome's rise lay a chilling reality: violence was not just an act of desperation but a deliberate strategy to forge identity, to establish a name that even the gods would remember. The abduction of the Sabine women remains one of the most haunting chapters in Rome's early story. A grand festival, with laughter ringing in the air, innocent joy lighting up faces, quickly turned into chaos. The women, who had come to dance and celebrate under the open skies, suddenly found themselves pulled into a brutal struggle. They were snatched away from the arms of their families, cries echoing over a city that was both building itself and breaking hearts at the same time. The men of Rome, their eyes set and hearts hardened, dragged the Sabine women away, each one knowing the price of this act but unwilling to let it deter them. Romulus, Rome's founder and architect, had his reasons, though no reason could ease the pain of those captured. His fledgling city needed women, not just for survival but for continuity, to ensure that the seed of Rome would grow, thrive, and one day dominate the known world. It was not a crime of passion or impulse, but a calculated move, a cruel necessity that turned into a defining moment for the city's future. The implications went beyond the anguish of that day. Rome, a city born from the blood of its founders and now marked by an act of sheer violence, was establishing an identity built on power, control, and a sense of unbreakable resolve. The use of violence to assert dominance wasn't a matter of choice, but a grim acceptance of what it took to survive in a brutal world. In a landscape where kingdoms rose and fell like the sun, where invaders and enemies lurked at every border, Rome embraced violence as a tool of statecraft. The abduction set a precedent, a reminder that Rome would not bend, even when morality wavered. This moment left scars, not just on those directly affected but on the fabric of Roman culture, threading through generations, shaping how Romans saw themselves and their destiny. The Sabine fathers, brothers, and lovers who were left behind felt a rage that only loss could ignite. But they, too, understood the ways of power. Retaliation was inevitable. And as Sabine warriors marched to reclaim their daughters, wives, and sisters, they brought with them a storm that threatened to break Rome before it could even stand. The battle that followed was not just a clash of weapons, but a conflict of identities, a question of who would be remembered as the victor and who would be forced into the shadows of history. Rome's answer to such challenges was always the same: strength, relentless and merciless. The violence of that abduction, of tearing innocent lives apart, was part of the city's ruthless logic. The abduction wasn't a singular act, but rather the start of a pattern where violence became the language Rome used to write its story. It became a city where conquering and holding power meant accepting the harshest realities, where brutality wasn't hidden but worn as a badge of honor. This was a city destined to conquer the world, and it was from this hard, unyielding beginning that its spirit was forged. Yet beneath the blood and thunder, the abduction and the violence raised profound questions. Did this legacy make Rome strong, or did it leave cracks in its soul that never truly healed? For the Sabine women, taken and torn from everything they knew, survival meant navigating a new life built on pain and loss. But their strength became part of Rome's foundation, too. They carved out roles for themselves, mothers and mediators who would one day stop the bloodshed between Romans and their Sabine families, stitching together two communities bound by violence but yearning for peace. Rome's relationship with violence became a defining characteristic, shaping its citizens' worldview. To be Roman meant understanding that force could shape destiny, that cruelty could be dressed in the language of necessity. The implications ran deep: a city that valued order over chaos, yet was willing to use chaos to achieve order, a culture that glorified military might, yet had no illusions about the cost of such glory. Violence wasn't random but calculated, an act that, despite its horror, built legends and made people speak of Rome in hushed tones or raised voices. The abduction echoed through the years, coloring the image of what Rome was and what it would become. Power, in this society, came from a place of fear as much as respect. And the gods, from their thrones in the heavens, watched as mortals wrestled with their destinies, as Rome, this ambitious, fierce city, continued to be molded by blood, both shed and spilled. Each act of violence was a gamble, a sacrifice to an uncertain future, a prayer that this brutal path would lead to greatness. What happened to those Sabine women left a mark that never faded. They had been taken by force, but they became part of the story that would make Rome immortal. The violence that birthed their new reality became a lesson, echoing that power often came at an unbearable price. The men who had stolen them, the fathers who fought for them, all were players in a cycle that made Rome both admired and feared. Rome would go on to conquer lands far and wide, to leave its mark on the world in ways that few civilizations ever have. Yet, at its heart, the city's formation was steeped in the hard truth that sometimes power is seized, not given, and that the act of taking it leaves wounds that never quite close. The legacy of violence shaped the state, its laws, its military conquests, and even its myths. This legacy is a reminder of how nations are often built not by ideals but by struggles, pain, and the desperate acts of people caught between survival and ambition. It is a story not just of victory, but of the shadows cast by those victories, shadows that whisper that everything, even power, comes at a cost. Legends have a way of haunting us. They breathe and linger, leaving traces that refuse to be forgotten. The story of the Sabine women, once confined to dusty scrolls and whispered histories, has found new life in today's world, a world where every tale is examined, every narrative questioned, and where pain from the past is no longer hidden but dissected under the light of modern thought. What was once accepted as history or myth now speaks to us differently, asking us to understand the depth of human suffering and survival. It begins with the abduction, a story retold countless times, but never growing less horrifying. In the old accounts, the festival of joy turned into a nightmare of fear and desperation. The laughter of women and girls replaced by screams as Roman men executed a brutal, planned assault on innocents. Modern eyes cannot look away from the raw brutality, and many now question how such an event could be seen as anything but a crime, a moment that brands humanity's long history of violence and subjugation. The women's terror has not been softened by time. Instead, it pierces more deeply now, for we have learned to listen to the cries that history once tried to silence. For feminists and those who care about the voices of the forgotten, this myth of abduction, once couched in a narrative of state-building necessity, is no longer a tale of triumph, but a reminder of how women's bodies have too often been used as pawns in the games of power-hungry men. The Sabine women were daughters, sisters, and dreams yet to be fulfilled, their lives turned upside down without a hint of mercy. Yet in ancient texts, their suffering was framed as a means to an end. Today, the cost of such violence is more visible. Each woman's story echoes in the hearts of those who see these myths not as distant tales, but as reflections of an ongoing struggle for agency and respect. Their abduction is not just a moment of violence, but a symbol, one that modern interpreters use to highlight how systems of power have historically controlled and broken women. In feminist readings, the myth becomes more than a story of forced marriages and war. It becomes a case study in how patriarchy survives by justifying acts of cruelty, how narratives are shaped to absolve the powerful while leaving the oppressed to adapt or disappear. The Romans wanted legacy and lineage, and in that pursuit, they shattered lives. Feminist critics feel the weight of that cruelty, and in every retelling, there is a demand for recognition, a cry that the women be remembered not for the roles they were forced to play, but for the lives they could have had. But within the horror, something unexpected unfolds. The strength of the Sabine women refuses to be ignored. In those bleak days following their abduction, they faced the unimaginable. They were not warriors, nor did they have power to reclaim their lost freedom, but they carried a fire within. While the world would have allowed them to be victims, some found a way to write a new ending. It is this resilience that modern readers cling to, not to romanticize suffering, but to see human courage in the face of devastation. The women, denied a voice in their initial tragedy, found a way to speak. When war raged between their fathers and their abductors, it was these women who stepped into the carnage and demanded peace. It was a gesture born of desperation, but also of an indomitable will to shape the world differently. Feminist thinkers see this act as profound and powerful, a moment that reclaims the Sabine women's narrative from being just a footnote to a male-dominated story. They were not passive, they wielded the one power left to them, the ability to forgive, to reconcile, to demand an end to the bloodshed that tore apart the men they had been forced to call family and those they had left behind. Even so, questions linger. How should we feel about a choice made in circumstances so unnatural, so unfair? Did the women find peace, or were they simply trying to survive in a world that gave them no choice at all? Today's interpretations do not shy away from that complexity. Contemporary society, shaped by movements for gender equality and a reckoning with past wrongs, challenges the idea that peace brought by the Sabine women was a triumph. Perhaps it was a victory, but perhaps it was also a tragedy, a reminder of how women have so often had to bear the weight of men's wars, the grief of being torn between two worlds and expected to heal the wounds they never caused. The myth no longer belongs just to the Romans, it belongs to all who question how violence and power continue to shape our world. Artists and writers have taken these new interpretations and transformed them into paintings, poems, and stories. In canvases filled with wild strokes of pain and light, the faces of the Sabine women look back at us, asking for acknowledgement of both their strength and their suffering. In stories, their voices are given back, their struggles no longer sidelined but honored. The myth is no longer static, it breathes, infused with all the grief, rage, and resilience that still resonate across centuries. The retellings are not easy to hear. They force us to sit with the uncomfortable truth that the past was often brutal, and that myths can be both beautiful and horrifying, both a celebration of cultural roots and a reminder of how far we still have to go. Modern interpretations of the abduction have turned the story into a conversation about trauma, survival, and the price of power. The Sabine women stand as symbols of a painful legacy but also of hope, hope that even in the darkest moments, courage can emerge, and that every act of resistance, no matter how quiet, leaves a mark that history cannot erase. A moment of betrayal, frozen in time, has echoed through the centuries. The story of the rape of the Sabine women is not an easy one to revisit. Yet, art, film, and literature have persistently returned to this harrowing tale, seizing the raw emotion and moral complexity at its core. Each brushstroke, every line of dialogue, each chapter, seems to cry out with a desperate and unspoken anguish that begs to be heard and understood. Throughout history, artists have tried to capture the chaotic terror of that day. One can almost feel the desperation in Nicolas Poussin's famous paintings, where scenes explode with motion and agony. Arms outstretched, faces twisted in shock, mothers clutching children, the images don't spare the viewer. Instead, they demand that you witness the heartbreak. You sense the fear and helplessness, almost hear the wails and shouts, as a festival of peace descended into utter ruin. These canvases, so silent yet so loud, are timeless reminders of how human dignity can be shattered in a single, ruthless act. But the story doesn't remain confined to ancient brushstrokes. Writers, too, have wrestled with the moral conundrums the event raises. The word rape here signifies an abduction, but over time it has carried with it all the implications of violation, of bodies and souls stolen without consent. Poets have mourned the loss of innocence, crafting verses that bleed with sorrow and betrayal. Novels have delved into the psychological aftermath, the struggles of the women forced into a world they never chose. Every adaptation tries to reckon with what it means to have your fate written by someone else, to lose your agency and be left with the struggle of reclaiming it. And then there is the world of cinema, where the story unfolds with visceral power. The abduction, sometimes filmed with uncomfortable closeness, forces the audience to witness what can't be looked away from. Directors have faced an impossible task. How do you portray such violence without becoming complicit in its spectacle? Yet, some films have sought to peel back the layers, exploring the aftermath, the forced unions, and the heartbreaking resilience of the women. Through the lens, these women are given back some of their humanity, a chance to be seen as more than victims, but as people who found ways to survive, adapt, and, in some portrayals, even forgive. Modern critics have not stayed silent. They question these depictions, asking what it means for our society that a story rooted in the denial of consent has been romanticized or softened over time. The discussion often shifts to the present, where issues of consent and agency remain painfully relevant. When the Sabine women are depicted in art or film, there's a risk of making their suffering seem distant, as though it belongs to a different era. Yet, feminist scholars argue that this myth forces a confrontation with our own failures as a society to protect and empower women. The Sabine women's ordeal is not just an ancient problem, it's a mirror to today's conversations about autonomy and the ways power can be misused. Still, the artistic interpretations of this narrative vary greatly. Some choose to portray the strength of the women, focusing on how they later influenced their captors and changed a violent moment into a forced, fragile peace. These stories speak of a complex kind of courage, one that doesn't erase trauma but seeks to build something meaningful in its wake. Others take a more critical stance, refusing to sugarcoat the event's horror, demanding that audiences feel the full weight of what it means to have your life upended. Public discussions today are also shaped by evolving understandings of trauma. The Sabine women's story has become a reference point for conversations about recovery and survival. When seen through the lens of psychology, their legacy becomes a testament to how deeply such violence wounds, but also how the human spirit, when nurtured and given space, can fight to heal. Artists and writers who explore this narrative are aware of the delicate balance between honoring the pain of the past and offering a vision of strength. They know that every retelling carries a responsibility. Popular culture also circles back to themes of power and choice. In theater productions, some plays depict the Sabine women standing firm, voicing their pain, and demanding recognition of their humanity. These interpretations challenge the audience to think about complicity, bystanders, and how societies often fail to protect the vulnerable. The myth becomes a warning, a call to action to do better, to understand that a single act of cruelty reverberates through generations. But it is the conversations about consent that have given this story new urgency. In a world more attuned to the importance of listening to survivors, the Sabine women's experience takes on a new, almost prophetic dimension. The horror of their story isn't a distant relic but a haunting reminder that we still struggle to understand and respect agency fully. How many times have women been told to accept the unacceptable, to endure for the sake of peace or stability? The Sabine women, as depicted in art and storytelling, push us to question those demands, to think critically about how often history has been built on the suffering of those whose voices were never heard. The Sabine women's story isn't just about the past, it's a narrative that continues to evolve, taking on new shades of meaning with each era. It's about the human cost of power, about survival, and the complicated ways people find to live on after violence. It's about the fight to be seen, to reclaim a life stolen, to turn a moment of horror into a story of resilience. And even as artists, writers, and directors continue to tell and retell this ancient tale, they remind us that some wounds may never fully heal, but the telling of the story gives back what was taken, a voice, a memory, a legacy. A cry of anguish from centuries past echoes through the annals of history, and it isn't the only one. The abduction of the Sabine women, so hauntingly vivid and full of despair, isn't an isolated story. The pain of being taken against one's will, the shattering of families, the forced intertwining of two lives that never asked to be joined, these are horrors that humankind, tragically, has repeated more times than the heart can bear. This ancient event stands in a long line of human conflicts where the powerless were used as pawns, where women's bodies became the battlefield upon which men fought their wars of pride and domination. It is impossible to hear the tale of the Sabine women and not feel the sting of other times, other places, where innocence was torn away by force. One such bitter reminder comes from the stories of the rape of the Sabines' historical cousins, the events of wartime abductions that scarred societies. During the Viking raids, women were often taken from coastal settlements, carried away from their homes and families, their future as unknown and terrifying as the waves that bore them off. These women, much like the Sabines, faced a world turned upside down, a world where their past lives were torn to shreds in an instant. The echoes grow even louder when we think of the comfort women during the Second World War. Women, captured or coerced, were forced to endure unimaginable torment. Their humanity was stripped away by the violence of powerful men, and they lived with the trauma long after the conflicts ended. What did it mean for these women to be caught in a conflict they never started, their fates used as bargaining chips? Just as the Sabine women had to find a way to build lives from the ruins of what had been taken from them, so too did these women carry forward, burdened with stories of pain that the world was often too slow to hear. The lessons from these events are painful to learn, yet they offer a window into human resilience. The Sabine women's story, despite its initial horror, carries with it an undeniable strength. When they were taken, their cries of anguish might have mixed with the screams of disbelief from fathers, mothers, and siblings left behind, powerless to help. But over time, these women found ways to create meaning in the chaos forced upon them. They played a pivotal role in negotiating peace, stitching together a fragile truce between two warring peoples. In their actions, they taught the world a lesson: even in the bleakest of circumstances, there is a strength that cannot be snatched away. The human spirit is woven from threads of hope, even when frayed by violence. Across different cultures, we see the same heartbreaking pattern, a clash of male power, and the women caught in the aftermath, having to make a new world from shattered pieces. In the Trojan War, another legendary example, Helen's story is a grim echo of the Sabine women's experience. Though the abduction of Helen might have been wrapped in myth and grandeur, it reminds us of how the personal was made political, how a woman's fate was transformed into a struggle for power. Just like the Sabines, Helen became a symbol, while her pain and loss, her individual humanity, often became secondary to the tale of clashing kingdoms. One lesson resonates more powerfully than all others: the idea of agency taken and agency reclaimed. The women in these stories were stripped of choice, robbed of their right to shape their own destinies. Yet, in each instance, they found ways to exert influence, to push back against the fate forced upon them. The Sabine women, by placing themselves between their Roman husbands and their Sabine fathers, forced peace where there should have only been continued bloodshed. They defied the script written for them by stepping into the narrative as mediators, as agents of change, embodying a defiance born not from physical power but from an unbreakable will to end the cycle of violence. History is a mirror reflecting these tragedies back at us, imploring us to learn. When we hear the stories of abductions and forced assimilation, we must remember the Sabine women not as passive victims, but as unwilling participants who transformed their suffering into an unlikely hope for peace. How many times has humanity failed to listen to the lessons whispered by their legacy? Yet, it also serves as a warning. The patterns of human cruelty continue to resurface because the lessons haven't always been heeded. Across centuries, tales of forced displacement, the weaponization of the vulnerable, and the erasure of autonomy tell us that society has yet to fully grapple with the consequences of such acts. How often has history's indifference allowed similar stories to unfold again and again? Even in recent conflicts, tales of women taken and treated as spoils of war linger in headlines, reminding us that this isn't just a narrative from a distant past. It's a stark reality for far too many. The Sabine women's story carries a deep and mournful resonance. It is a memory of how power, wielded without compassion, can ruin lives, but it's also a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who have suffered but refuse to be defined solely by their pain. The lessons learned, or not learned, speak volumes about the evolution of societies, how far they've come and how far they have yet to go. It's a heartbreaking reminder that even though time can dull the pain, it cannot erase the marks left by such events, and it urges us to honor the past by shaping a more compassionate future. In a moment of stillness, when the noise of the world fades and history speaks, we find ourselves grappling with echoes of pain, desperation, and raw human emotion. The abduction of the Sabine women, a heart-wrenching story from ancient Rome, is more than just an account of conquest. It is a tear-soaked page in the book of human suffering. But what strikes hardest is how familiar it feels, how this tale is one of many where human beings have been stripped of choice and families shattered in an instant. The world has witnessed the Sabine women's cries many times over, dressed in different names and places, but speaking the same language of loss. When the Sabine women were seized, they were not merely taken, they were torn away from the fabric of their existence. Mothers wrenched from their children, sisters separated from brothers, daughters from fathers. It wasn't just about land or glory, but a brutal violation of trust and humanity. Yet, as we turn the pages of history, we find chillingly similar scenes, innocent lives caught in the brutal machinery of conquest and war. Centuries later, the Mongol invasions unleashed terror that swallowed entire regions. Men, women, and children fell victim to a tide of violence that swept away all that they had known. Women were captured, their fate sealed by the victors, leaving behind fathers who could only weep at the loss of their daughters and young men who carried the scars of families ripped apart. The devastation mirrored the anguish of the Sabines, a human grief that transcends the centuries. Imagine a father running, breathless and hopeless, after the retreating army, his voice cracking as he calls for the daughter he will never see again. History tells us that in such moments, there is only the cruel reality of defeat and stolen futures. Another painful echo comes from the Atlantic slave trade. Families were shattered, children torn from their parents, and lives sold as though they were mere possessions. The violence of being stripped away from one's identity, community, and everything familiar resonates with the same gut-wrenching horror faced by the Sabine women. There is no comfort in comparing these atrocities, only a deep sorrow at how the human heart has been forced to endure so much cruelty. People bound together in love, loyalty, and kinship were pulled apart, their cries ignored by a world ruled by power and conquest. They, too, like the Sabine women, were made to find ways to rebuild from ashes, to breathe life into dreams crushed underfoot. Yet it wasn't only in Rome or the fields where the Mongol hordes rode. In World War II, women across Europe experienced the nightmare of violence and abduction. The horrors faced by women during the conflicts in occupied territories were hauntingly reminiscent of what befell the Sabine women. Once more, we see women whose bodies became battlefields, used as tools in wars they never asked for. The collective memory of these atrocities still brings tears to the eyes of those who hear their stories. They are stories that remind us of how conflict dehumanizes and strips away the sacred bonds of family and safety. In each of these stories, there is an undeniable truth: violence and war have repeatedly robbed the vulnerable of agency. The Sabine Women story, in all its agony, teaches us that the consequences of such acts are not confined to the moment of abduction but ripple through generations. A mother's grief, a father's rage, a community's broken trust, these are wounds that time struggles to heal. And in recognizing this, we realize that history has laid before us lesson after lesson on the cost of treating human lives as collateral. Yet from these ashes, there are also stories of resilience and the strength of the human spirit. Despite the horror inflicted upon them, the Sabine women emerged as pivotal figures who tried to stitch together the pieces of a fractured world. They stood between fathers and husbands, between warriors ready to spill more blood, and demanded peace. Their courage reminds us of the power of the human heart to seek reconciliation, even when justice feels far away. It was a choice made not from weakness but from the deepest strength, a decision to end suffering and prevent further loss. From their story, and from countless others like it, we learn that while violence may shape the world, it is the defiance of those who suffer most deeply that has the potential to truly transform it. In Rwanda, after the genocide, women led the way in rebuilding communities, finding ways to mend the torn social fabric. In Bosnia, where ethnic conflict left similar scars, women have stood as beacons of healing, confronting past trauma to pave the way for future generations. Just as the Sabine women found themselves at the heart of a fight they did not choose but nonetheless chose to end, so too have women throughout history turned tragedy into a testament of their will to create peace. In comparing these moments of suffering, it isn't the similarities that should numb us but the shared humanity that demands our empathy. The Sabine women's legacy, and the echoes of their pain found throughout history, reminds us to look closer, to feel deeper. To recognize that behind each historical event labeled as a conquest or abduction lies the reality of families broken, of love turned into mourning. This truth urges us to never become complacent, to never accept the suffering of the innocent as just another chapter in the book of human conflict. These lessons, though hard-earned, are perhaps the most important of all. They compel us to examine how power should be wielded and who bears the brunt of its misuse. We see how every act of violence against the vulnerable ripples outward, damaging the soul of society itself. In honoring the strength of the Sabine women and all who have faced similar fates, we acknowledge not only their pain but also their resilience. We remember that the stories of those who endure have the power to teach and transform us if only we are willing to listen. The past has a way of echoing through the corridors of time, whispering its stories to those who will listen. The tale of the rape of the Sabine women, haunting and raw, has held a peculiar grip over centuries of scholarship, each retelling woven with threads of fear, sorrow, and even hope. Yet, the voices that recount this tale don't always agree. They clash, evolve, and transform with the shifting sands of human understanding. The debates are passionate, laden with conflicting truths and interpretations that reveal more about our collective soul than we often wish to admit. Centuries ago, historians approached this story with a different lens. Livy, the ancient Roman historian, captured it as both a founding moment of Rome and a tale of tragedy. In Livy's account, there is a sense of both horror and honor. The abduction of the women is presented with all the grimness of violated humanity, yet also laced with the practical necessity of Rome's survival. It feels cold to our modern ears, yet Livy spoke for his time, trying to balance the anguish of the women with the narrative of Rome's ascendancy. He described the tears, the screams, and the chaos, but he also tried to justify the unspeakable through the logic of empire building. The conflict within his words unsettles, as if even he struggled to reconcile the humanity of the Sabine women with the story of Rome's greatness. Centuries later, Renaissance scholars grappled with this story, but now through a lens tinted by art, politics, and rediscovered love for classical antiquity. Painters like Nicolas Poussin captured it on canvas, full of vibrant, wrenching emotion. Scholars, however, debated, was this myth a metaphor or a real event twisted by Roman propaganda? These questions hung in the air, unsettling those who adored the grandness of Rome but couldn't ignore the brutality of its foundational legends. Historians of this period wrestled with admiration for Rome's legacy and a creeping discomfort with the blood and tears on which it was built. They discussed, they wrote, and they pondered if history's purpose was to inspire awe or caution. The Enlightenment era saw another transformation. The myth was dissected through reason, analyzed as a product of an age where might made right. Skepticism took hold, and scholars began to view the story as a constructed narrative, designed to imbue Rome's birth with a sense of grandeur, albeit at a horrifying cost. Philosophers wondered, was this story a tool used to subjugate the moral voices of dissent? Or was it a warning wrapped in the language of conquest? They examined gender roles, the commodification of women, and how this tale reflected patriarchal control. The story began to feel less about a singular event and more like a mirror held up to human society's worst impulses. These debates were intense and, at times, bitter, as scholars sought to peel back the layers of legend. The 19th and 20th centuries brought a new surge of interest as the world experienced revolutions, wars, and struggles for human rights. Historians, now more attuned to the voices of the marginalized, asked urgent questions about the Sabine women themselves. They wondered about the psychological trauma, the shattered families, and the lives interrupted by violence. Women's voices became more pronounced in historiography, demanding that the Sabine women be seen not as symbols but as human beings. Feminist scholars examined the gender dynamics, asking why the suffering of women was woven into the very fabric of civilization-building narratives. The conversation shifted from simply asking whether the story was real to why such a myth held such power over collective memory. These scholars infused new life into the old tale, refusing to let the women be mere props in Rome's glory. Some historians dared to draw parallels to modern atrocities. The rape of the Sabine women was no longer just an ancient story, it echoed in discussions about wartime sexual violence, colonization, and the weaponization of women's bodies. In a world that had experienced 2 world wars, genocide, and ongoing conflicts, this ancient story felt painfully relevant. Scholars wrote with urgency, demanding that the world learn from the past's grim lessons. They called for empathy, for understanding the enduring trauma that ripples from such acts of violence, often far beyond the initial event. And yet, with all these perspectives came disagreements. Some traditionalists argued that examining the story through a modern lens distorted its historical context. They felt the Sabine women's tale was an allegory of political unity, focusing on how the women brokered peace between Romans and Sabines. These scholars emphasized the narrative of reconciliation, seeing it as a moment when love and unity triumphed over hate. Their interpretations felt hopeful, but critics questioned if hope could ever redeem the violence that preceded it. In more recent decades, the debates have grown even more layered. The intersection of myth and history continues to intrigue and divide. Some scholars argue that the Sabine women's tale is a testament to the human capacity for healing, while others cannot escape the horror of the initial crime. The story has become a battlefield for ideas, where every word, every nuance, is scrutinized. The myth's persistence reveals humanity's struggle to understand its own capacity for both cruelty and redemption. How does a society live with the sins of its past? How does it honor the victims while acknowledging that even they became agents of peace? Some scholars have taken a different approach entirely, seeing the Sabine women's story as a lens through which to study the evolution of societal values. They argue that examining this myth is less about Rome and more about humanity's need to create narratives, stories that help make sense of chaos and justify power. The Sabine women became, in essence, symbols twisted to fit the needs of the storyteller, whether for justifying conquest, romanticizing sacrifice, or advocating for peace. And each interpretation, each retelling, leaves us with more questions than answers. Perhaps the heart of the debate is this: how do we honor the memory of the Sabine women? Are they victims, heroines, or both? Is the story a necessary evil in the birth of a civilization or a cautionary tale about the misuse of power? Scholars continue to write, argue, and feel, knowing that in these questions lie the complexities of human existence. And through it all, the voices of the Sabine women, though often silenced or manipulated, still echo, demanding to be heard, even if only in the tears we shed for them. A single story can carry the weight of centuries, pressing down on our collective consciousness like an ancient stone. The ways we choose to tell stories of violence and pain have profound effects, echoing through time and shaping how we perceive the past, the victims, and the perpetrators. But with each retelling comes an immense responsibility, the responsibility to be honest, compassionate, and deeply aware of the consequences of our narratives. In the heart of history, there are moments so brutal, so aching, that words can hardly contain their impact. Yet we have to try, because to remain silent would be to erase those who suffered. When we recount stories of violence, especially in tales like the abduction of the Sabine women or similar tragedies, how we tell these stories matters more than we can ever fully grasp. It's about honoring the reality of pain, ensuring that suffering isn't romanticized, and making sure that the voices that were once suppressed are finally, unmistakably heard. The hardest part lies in the ethical tension between presenting the truth and avoiding sensationalism. When telling stories of violence, there's always the risk of unintentionally glorifying the act or using the trauma of others as a tool for engagement. In every horrific detail recounted, there is a delicate line between evoking necessary emotion and exploiting someone's pain. The goal should never be to reduce real human agony into mere spectacle, nor to transform the suffering of the marginalized into a dramatic plot twist in the grand narrative of history. The human cost must remain visible, sacred, and heartbreaking, and the storyteller must tread carefully, aware that every description carries the weight of lives once lived and souls once broken. Think of the Sabine women. Their story isn't just an event in the timeline of Rome, it's a story of real fear, torn families, shattered trust, and a trauma that rippled through generations. If we speak of this moment carelessly, reducing these women to mere pawns in Rome's mythic founding tale, we fail them. We erase the mothers who clutched their children, the young women who felt their futures wrenched away, the fathers who never saw their daughters again. Every life mattered. Every tear that fell from a Sabine mother's eye held the universe's sorrow, and if we are to retell their story, that sorrow cannot be dismissed or softened. But ethical storytelling isn't just about recounting violence accurately, it's about whose voices we choose to center. For centuries, history has favored the voices of the victors, the powerful, those who wrote the records. The Sabine women's voices were swallowed by history's loud, triumphant echoes. It wasn't their perspective that was enshrined, it was the conqueror's version, wrapped in the language of power and progress. To tell their story now, with empathy and truth, is to engage in an act of defiance against historical erasure. It's to say that their pain was not acceptable, that their voices mattered, that we see them. Imagine how differently history could be perceived if, instead of only hearing about the strategies of kings and the glory of empires, we truly listened to the accounts of those who suffered in the shadows. How would the stories shift if the enslaved, the displaced, the abused, and the forgotten were given center stage? The responsibility in telling these stories lies in ensuring that they are not flattened, that the victims are not robbed of their humanity again by being turned into mere symbols or numbers. Every person who suffered was a complete, living, breathing individual with dreams, loves, and fears. When we speak of marginalized voices in historical narratives, there's an obligation to lift those voices with dignity, not pity. The women, the children, the outsiders, those who have been silenced, deserve to be represented in ways that recognize their resilience and humanity. It's not enough to acknowledge their suffering, we must also celebrate their endurance, their strength, and the small acts of defiance they clung to in their darkest hours. Because in the face of overwhelming brutality, every heartbeat, every whispered prayer, every ounce of hope was a miracle. Yet, even as we attempt to bring justice to these voices, there are challenges. Who has the right to tell these stories? Can anyone truly capture the depth of pain experienced by a Sabine woman dragged from her home? Or a victim of colonial violence forced into a life of servitude? There is no perfect answer, but there is a way forward, with humility, with the understanding that as storytellers, historians, or even mere retellers, our interpretations are never perfect. All we can do is approach with reverence, knowing we stand on sacred ground whenever we recount a narrative drenched in suffering. We must also remember that ethical storytelling is an evolving art. What was once considered acceptable may now feel tone-deaf or dismissive. Our understanding of trauma, human rights, and the dignity of every individual has grown, and our narratives must grow with it. The stories we tell must be shaped not only by facts, but by a commitment to empathy. They must strive to shed light on the complexities of human experience, recognizing that in the telling, we are shaping not just a memory of the past, but the conscience of the present. The Sabine Women story, like many others of violence and subjugation, challenges us to ask, are we amplifying their pain for a purpose? Are we seeking to inspire change, reflection, or understanding? Or are we merely recounting for the sake of it, turning human suffering into an academic exercise? Ethical storytelling demands we wrestle with these questions, that we remain uncomfortable and vigilant. Because when we choose to speak for those who were never given a voice, we are wielding immense power, and with it comes a duty to tell their truth, their heartbreak, and their legacy as if it were our own. And perhaps, in doing so, we honor them in the only way we know how. There are voices in history that whisper through the cracks, aching to be heard. They are the stories of women, mothers, daughters, leaders, visionaries, whose lives mattered but were often overlooked, dismissed, or buried beneath the louder echoes of kings and conquerors. These stories are not mere footnotes or shadows, they are as vivid and important as any grand historical saga. And they have the power to change how we understand the world we live in. Imagine the countless women who carried nations on their backs, held families together in the most impossible times, and whispered wisdom into the ears of rulers. They fought wars in silence, not with swords, but with resilience, grace, and strength. They made choices in the face of unimaginable loss, choices that influenced generations. Yet, so often, the pages of history closed on them too quickly, as if their stories weren't worth telling. How many tales of heartbreak, courage, and quiet endurance were lost because they were deemed insignificant? How many times were women's voices hushed, their experiences brushed aside? When we advocate for a more inclusive narrative, we are not just adding a chapter or two to the history books. We are shifting the entire foundation. We are saying that the past was lived by everyone, and every story has a right to be told. Women's experiences shaped families, economies, communities, and cultures. They endured wars, survived plagues, built homes from the ruins, and found joy in moments when it seemed impossible. Their stories tell of how humanity survived the worst and celebrated the best. Women's stories are full of moments that leave you breathless. Consider the countless mothers who held their children close as empires fell around them. They sang lullabies amidst the sounds of chaos, determined to protect innocence in a world that felt anything but safe. Or think of the women who led resistance movements, who risked everything to protect their communities from invaders or oppressive regimes. These acts of courage didn't make them famous or powerful, but they were heroic. They were everything. History has always been more than battles and politics. It's made up of whispered prayers, secret acts of defiance, and small, unbreakable threads of hope. Women's stories show us the parts of history that make it human and relatable. They reveal what it felt like to wait for a husband who never returned from war, or the way a community would rally together when a disaster struck. They remind us that history wasn't just about great achievements, it was also about surviving day by day, finding moments of light in darkness, and holding on to love in a world that could be so harsh. There's a raw beauty in understanding the past through the eyes of women. It shows us the tenderness and the unimaginable strength it took to keep moving forward. Women often held society together from behind the scenes, ensuring that life went on, that traditions were kept alive, and that there was always a reason to keep hoping. They grieved deeply, loved fiercely, and never gave up, even when everything around them was crumbling. Their strength is the reason generations were born, and their courage is why traditions survived. Consider the women who were healers, wise in the ways of medicine passed down through generations. They comforted the sick and the dying, often risking their own lives in the process. Or think of those who worked the land alongside men, who toiled under the same sun but were rarely credited for their labor. There were queens who made alliances, scholars who wrote poetry under pen names, artists whose work was claimed by men. They were warriors disguised as ordinary women, protecting secrets and preserving cultures. Every time we hear a story of a woman who stood up when no one else would or worked tirelessly for her family's future, something powerful happens. We understand history not as a series of grand events, but as a collection of human experiences. We feel the love that kept families together, the grief that changed lives forever, and the hope that refused to be extinguished. Women's experiences also highlight how societies evolved, how customs changed, and how progress was made. Women's struggles for basic rights shaped movements and laws, influencing everything from labor practices to voting rights. The fight for equality wasn't a single moment in time, it was, and continues to be, a series of moments where women stood up, spoke out, and refused to be silent. These moments teach us about resilience and the cost of change. When we finally give these stories the attention they deserve, we see the world differently. We start to notice how much we owe to those who worked in the shadows, whose names we might never know but whose impact was immeasurable. We realize that bravery doesn't always look like a warrior charging into battle. Sometimes, it looks like a woman raising her children alone after her husband went to war. Sometimes, it's a girl daring to learn how to read in a time and place where that was forbidden. Women's stories are also a reminder that history's injustices were often born from inequality and that those injustices didn't end with time. The struggles of the past echo into the present, making it all the more important to understand and recognize them. When women's voices are amplified, we not only gain a richer understanding of the past, but we also gain empathy for the ongoing struggles faced by women today. Their stories give us context, a reason to care, and a call to action. The past is full of lessons, and one of the most important is that every life is worthy of remembrance. Every voice deserves to be heard. Women's stories make us question who we have chosen to remember and who we have forgotten. They urge us to do better, to write a history that our children will read with pride, knowing that everyone's experience matters and every life has value. The truth is, history told only through the lens of the powerful is incomplete. It's like hearing a song with half the notes missing. Women's stories are the missing notes, and when we hear them, we understand the song in a way we never could before. They make the past come alive with color, texture, and depth, revealing a history that is rich, full, and beautifully human. Their stories, full of heartbreak and triumph, belong to all of us, shaping who we are and how we see the world. There is a moment that never seems to leave you once you really see it, the haunting way history echoes into the present. We live in a world that sometimes feels worlds away from the past, but some things have stubbornly stayed the same. The connection between gender and violence, written into the ancient dust of human civilization, lingers in shadows today. It's a reminder that even as centuries have rolled on, some wounds are still raw, some struggles still as urgent as they ever were. It's impossible to think about our present without feeling the ghosts of past violence against women. The history books tell us about battles fought and won, about empires that rose and crumbled, but too often they skim over the trauma endured by women and marginalized voices. These are stories of pain that were brushed aside, moments when society turned a blind eye to violence that became normalized. It hurts to know that even now, we are fighting to change the narratives that have been built on the backs of generations of women who had no choice but to bear the brunt of a world governed by power and fear. Take a moment to feel the weight of that. The Sabine women, for example, whose lives were torn apart in the name of power and conquest, never got to see justice in their lifetimes. Their cries became lost in the grand stories of how nations were formed, their terror an ugly footnote to someone else's triumph. And yet, their pain was real, their terror something that shaped them, that no amount of glory or historical revision could erase. It was a moment that spoke volumes about the commodification of women, their bodies used as chess pieces in the games men played to control land, legacy, and power. When we think about that violence, it isn't an ancient, forgotten relic. We still live in a world where gender-based violence shapes the lives of so many. Every year, stories of abuse, harassment, and violence dominate our headlines. The modern world is scarred with the same patterns of power and dominance that were established long ago. Women continue to march, to scream for change, to fight for a world where they can feel safe and valued. It shouldn't have to be this way. Yet here we are, confronted with a history that won't let us forget and a present that demands our action. In these conversations, history isn't just about the past. It holds a mirror to the issues we see today. We draw a line from the Sabine women to the countless women who have fought for their rights, to the current waves of movements like #MeToo that force society to finally listen. Every act of violence leaves ripples, and those ripples become the stories we share, the traumas we acknowledge, and the changes we fight for. We are connected by threads that stretch across time, a tapestry woven with heartbreak, endurance, and the stubborn hope for a better world. What can we learn from that history, from those moments when women had no voice or choice? We learn that history can be both a burden and a guide. It reminds us of how hard women have fought for basic rights, for the freedom to live without fear. It reminds us of the cost of silence, of looking away when the most vulnerable need someone to speak up. And it also shows us that change, however slow, is possible. We can honor the past by refusing to let it repeat itself. Violence against women, rooted in power dynamics that go back centuries, isn't something that just vanishes because laws change or because we recognize that it's wrong. It's a disease that needs collective healing, a societal reckoning that goes beyond mere awareness. We need to change mindsets, dismantle systems that protect abusers, and create spaces where women can thrive. To do this, we need to look history in the eye, acknowledge the pain that's been passed down through generations, and promise to do better. Modern conversations about gender and violence also force us to confront the question, how do we ensure that history isn't just a series of cycles? How do we make sure that today's movements don't end in echoes, but in real, lasting change? It's not easy. It's a fight that requires courage, just as it always has. It demands that we confront uncomfortable truths, that we ask who has been left out of history's pages and whose pain has been erased in the name of progress. The role of history in addressing current gender dynamics is crucial. It provides context, yes, but it also offers motivation. We are reminded that we are not the first to fight, that women before us fought with far fewer resources and far less hope of victory, and yet they fought anyway. They planted seeds, knowing they might never see the flowers bloom. And now, here we are, with a chance to honor them by making sure the future is different. It's not just about ending violence, it's about creating a culture where respect, equity, and safety are non-negotiable. Where girls can grow up without the weight of fear pressing on their dreams, where women can live their lives fully, without being reduced to objects or footnotes. This requires systemic change, yes, but also a shift in how we view each other, how we teach our children, how we speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. The truth is, history's lessons aren't always easy to swallow. But they are necessary. They push us to question, to feel uncomfortable, and to act. We owe it to the past and to the future to create a world where stories of gender and violence are stories of what used to be, not what is. Where the Sabine women's legacy isn't one of tragedy, but a reminder of how far we've come, and how much further we need to go. Every step toward change is a tribute to the countless women who endured more than we could ever imagine. It's a promise that their pain wasn't for nothing, that their resilience matters, that their stories will be heard, and that our actions today can create a world they would be proud of. A world where history is a lesson in hope, not just heartbreak. A world where gender and violence no longer share the same sentence. A world we can finally say is truly free. There is a scene that has seared itself into the human story, a moment so raw and vivid, it feels alive even today. A group of women, the Sabine women, torn from their families, thrust into the heart of an unfolding crisis they never asked for, found themselves in a world crumbling with violence and ambition. The pain they carried, the shock and fear that overwhelmed them, were wounds only time could begin to heal. Yet, it's what they did in the face of that pain that makes their stories so unforgettable. It isn't just a tale of suffering but of astonishing strength, of human willpower to turn tragedy into transformation. Close your eyes and feel the weight of that moment, the sound of clashing swords, the cries of the wounded, the shouts of warriors battling for pride and territory. But then, cutting through the chaos, came the voices of the women, once helpless, now a force neither side could ignore. They stood, those women who had already lost so much, between their fathers and brothers on one side and the men they had unwillingly come to call husbands on the other. They threw themselves into the fray, desperate not for victory, but for an end to the violence that ripped apart their world. With tears streaming down their faces, they begged, pleaded, and demanded peace. Their bravery was not born of choice, but of necessity. They knew that they had the power to save lives, even if it came at the cost of their own hearts and dreams. They became peacemakers, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The scene is heart-wrenching, a collective act of courage and love, a refusal to let more blood be shed in their name. The Sabine women, once voiceless victims, became the architects of an unexpected unity. What remains so haunting is how their legacy reaches us today, whispering lessons across generations. The story has never been just about the violence or the triumph, it's about the deep, unbreakable will of women to protect, heal, and mend. They turned the raw material of their suffering into something powerful, a bridge between two warring peoples, a symbol of the possibility of reconciliation even in the darkest times. The significance of their actions lies in how they shifted the course of history, not through force, but through sheer, unyielding humanity. They remind us that while power is often measured by swords and armies, true power can also lie in the act of refusing to let hatred win. It's a truth that feels urgent even now. We live in a world still fractured by divisions, where the idea of peace can seem fragile, almost naive. Yet the story of the Sabine women stands as a testament to the enduring impact of compassion and bravery. Their legacy challenges us to think about what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves and to consider the price we are willing to pay for peace. The Sabine women's story is not ancient history, locked away and irrelevant. It reflects battles still being fought today, in different forms and on different stages. Women across the world continue to bear the burden of conflict, often finding themselves on the front lines, not as warriors but as peacemakers, as protectors of their families and communities. The echoes of the past are found in modern movements and protests against violence, and the voices of those advocating for change, for justice, for a world where every human being is valued and respected. Even now, the Sabine women inspire us to redefine what strength looks like. It isn't always loud or aggressive. Sometimes, it's standing firm when everything inside of you wants to collapse. Sometimes, it's being a healer in a world that insists on breaking. Their legacy tells us that courage can look like love in the face of hate, hope in the shadow of despair, and a fierce determination to protect what is good and right, even when the odds feel insurmountable. It's a legacy woven into the very fabric of how we talk about gender, violence, and peace. It raises uncomfortable questions about power and consent, about how societies have historically treated women and how that history still shapes our reality. The Sabine women's story is a reminder that the struggles of the past are not so far removed from the struggles of the present. It demands that we honor their memory by fighting for a world where no one has to endure what they endured, where no woman's worth is measured by what others can take from her. Their legacy also challenges us to reimagine what it means to belong to one another. In a world that seems increasingly polarized, the Sabine women remind us of the power of human connection. They found themselves caught between two worlds, and in bridging that divide, they planted the idea that maybe, just maybe, it's possible to heal what has been broken. That dream of unity, of peace, is as fragile as it is beautiful, and it's up to us to keep it alive. The Sabine women leave us with more than a story, they leave us with a call to action. A call to remember that our humanity, our capacity for compassion and courage, is what will define us. Their legacy is carried on in every act of kindness that refuses to be silenced by hate, and every step taken toward understanding and reconciliation. It's a legacy that holds our hand, that pulls us forward even when the world feels too heavy to bear. Their story, soaked in sorrow yet blazing with hope, reminds us that the past is never just the past. It is part of the air we breathe, the choices we make, the dreams we dare to dream. The Sabine women teach us that even in the face of unimaginable pain, there is room for something as transformative as love. Their legacy endures, a heartbeat that refuses to stop, a light that refuses to go out. They are reminders that even when history hurts, it also heals, one act of bravery at a time.